Claire raised her wine glass and said it like it was some cute inside joke. To my son Tyler, the real man of the house. It hung in the air like a fart in church. There were 6 of us at that table. Me, Claire, our friends George and Helena, and 2 new neighbors Claire was trying to impress. The neighbors smiled politely. George gave a soft, low chuckle, the kind that says, "Please don't involve me." Helena shot me a glance. Pity, not sympathy. I set down my fork, dabbed the corner of my mouth with the napkin. Good to know where I stand. Listen, quick break. We set a goal to hit 10K subscribers. So tap subscribe if you're liking these wild stories of betrayal. Now let's get back to the madness. Claire didn't miss a beat. She twirled her hair like a damn cheerleader and said, "Oh, come on. You've always known. Tyler comes first. You're always second." She laughed, and the table followed her cue like trained seals. I laughed too. Just once. Dry. Controlled. Appreciate the clarity. But if you looked at my eyes, you'd notice I wasn't laughing. Not even close. The waiter came by with the check, and Claire snatched it like always, waved my card at him like a trophy. "Ron spoils me," she said, without a flicker of irony. And maybe she thought that was enough. Throw in a compliment here, and they're like a dog treat for staying silent. That night, back home, she FaceTimed Tyler from bed. She was half drunk, legs sprawled across the comforter I paid for, giggling while he told her about his new tattoo. "It's your name in Roman numerals, Mom. Across my ribs." She squealed. "You're so thoughtful, baby." I walked past her side of the bed and into my office. Sat down. Opened my laptop. I didn't Google divorce attorneys. That would have been too dramatic for this stage. Instead, I opened a folder on my desktop I hadn't touched in 6 months. It was titled Line Drawn. Inside were scanned PDFs of our property deeds, my trust documents, joint accounts, her prenup copy, even a spreadsheet I'd made of every dollar that had come out of my account and landed in Tyler's freeloading hands over the last 7 years. I'd logged the cash for his car repairs, the investments that went nowhere, the bailouts on his credit card debt, the $2,400 bridge loan that Claire swore he'd pay back within 2 weeks. That was in 2019. Line by line, I updated the spreadsheet with that night's dinner tap. Then I pulled a sticky note from my desk drawer, one of those old yellow ones curling at the edges. On it, in blue ballpoint pen, I wrote, "You're always second." I folded it neatly, slid it into a blank envelope, and tucked it under my mousepad. That wasn't for her. That was for me. Around midnight, Claire tiptoed in and slid into bed like nothing happened. I could smell her Chardonnay breath from across the room. "You're mad," she said, not really asking. I shook my head. "Nope. Just thinking." She rolled over with a sigh. "Don't be sensitive. You know how I feel about Tyler. You knew that when we got married." I did. I looked up from my laptop. "But you've changed the definition of family since then, and I'm updating my files accordingly." She didn't hear me or didn't care to. She was already snoring. Her phone still lit up every few minutes with messages from Tyler. Probably photos of that stupid tattoo. I watched her sleep, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilt. I felt something closer to relief, because I realized I'd let myself get demoted. I'd volunteered for the back seat and hoped she'd notice, but she hadn't. She just got comfortable in the driver's seat, with Tyler in her lap, honking the damn horn. Not anymore. When I finally turned out the light, I didn't kiss her goodnight. I just closed the laptop, leaned back in the chair, and stared at the ceiling fan. It spun slowly, rhythmic, thoughtful, and so was I. The bank door chimed that soft corporate chime as I stepped in the next morning, one of those subtle little sounds that says, "Welcome, old man. Here's your financial dignity." I nodded at the receptionist. She recognized me. Everyone here did. That was the point. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even tense. I'd worn my usual Friday golf jacket, that quiet gray one Claire always said made me look like a walking retirement plan. Ironic, given I was about to make sure she'd never touch mine again. "Mr. Hanley, right this way," the banker said, stepping out from behind his glass cubicle. Robert, not Bob, never Bob, was the kind of guy who wore a pocket square unironically and had that permanent whiff of cologne that whispered, "Divorce attorney's best friend." We sat down. He offered me water. I declined. I pulled out a slim manila folder and laid it on the desk between us. Neat. Prepared. Final. I need to make a few changes. Robert raised an eyebrow. Of course. Anything specific? I nodded, flipped open the folder. Inside were updated entity documents, new LLC paperwork, trust restructuring instructions, and a revised will still unsigned, for now. I handed him the retirement trust first. I'd like to revoke Claire's beneficiary rights to this, I said. Effective immediately. She still gets the annuity access we arranged in the prenup. That doesn't change. Robert frowned, professional but clearly curious. That's a major revision. Is everything okay? Just doing some spring cleaning, I said, with the softest smile I could muster. I realized I'd been running a joint operation with someone who prefers solo control. He tilted his head. And the LLC? That's for the house in Santa Fe. The one under both our names. I'm moving my share into a single-member LLC. Tax protection and asset clarity. Robert blinked, then nodded. You know you don't need her signature for that. Just yours, as long as you're only moving your stake. I know. I passed him the pre-filled title transfer forms. And we never actually recorded her half separately on the deed. It was implied, not official. That's changing today. He stared at me for a moment like a priest about to ask whether I really wanted to confess all this. But instead, he just said, You want to set up a new operating account for the LLC? I did. So we did. I didn't touch a single account with her name on it. Not our checking. Not the mortgage account. Not her personal investments. Let her have her empire of favors and overdrafts and phone calls that start with, Babe, can you? My kingdom would be silent. Legally locked. We moved methodically. Signature after signature. Pins. Disclosures. The notary came in for the deed and the trust form updates. I smiled at her like we were finalizing a vacation rental, not cutting off the oxygen to a marriage. As Robert handed me the final document to sign, he hesitated. You sure you don't want to have this conversation with her first? I looked at him flatly. Robert, last night she toasted her grown man child as the real man of the house, while I paid the dinner bill and smiled. If that doesn't count as a conversation, I don't know what does. He gave a tight nod. Respectful. Almost impressed. By the time I left, I had everything I needed tucked into a single folder, new entity ownership, updated beneficiaries, and an account structure that would be harder to pierce than a federal safe. Claire didn't know it yet, but the game board had shifted. The chair she thought she was sitting in? Gone. Replaced. And she wouldn't notice until she tried to lean back and fell. As I stepped back out into the parking lot, the sun was already high. A beautiful Friday. Bright. Quiet. Unbothered. Just like I planned to be. Tyler strutted into my house like he'd just discovered fire. Aviators still on indoors, wireless earbuds in, leather jacket zipped all the way up like he thought he was auditioning for Shark Tank, Juvenile Edition. He dropped himself onto the living room couch without so much as a hello and said the 6 words I've come to associate with unpaid debts and migraines. I've got a killer new idea. I didn't say a word. Just took a slow sip of my coffee and waited for the usual pitch/begging routine. Claire came bustling in right after him with that grin she saves for moments when she thinks she's about to witness a breakthrough. She kissed him on the head like he was 9 again and said, Tell Ron what you told me. Tyler popped one earbud out. Okay, so, listen, this isn't like the crypto thing, all right? This is actually legit. I've got a friend who knows this guy in logistics, like actual freight brokering. And we're going to launch a platform that connects short-haul drivers with underloaded suppliers. Real-time. Disruptive tech. Claire nodded like he just cured ALS. Then Tyler leaned forward and said it like it was nothing. I need, like, a small loan. 25 grand. He sipped from the bottle of sparkling water he hadn't asked permission to open. That was his version of polite. And Claire, God help her, she didn't hesitate. Of course, sweetheart. We'll figure it out. Right, honey? She turned to me like I was a bank manager who'd been briefed off camera. I didn't look at her. I looked at him. Show me the business plan. Tyler blinked. What? You're asking for $25,000, I said calmly, setting my coffee down. You must have a plan. Market research, financial projections, cash flow model. Show me. He blinked again. Harder this time. Dude, Ron. I'm not pitching to a venture capitalist. I'm family. That's exactly why I'm asking, I said, leaning back into the armchair. Because if you weren't, I'd already be calling security. He laughed. At first. That cocky little snort he uses when someone tells him something inconvenient. You're unbelievable. Claire's mouth hung open. Ron. No, I cut in, still calm. He's asked for money 6 times in 5 years. Not once has he paid $1 back. Last time, you said it was the last time, remember? Tyler stood. I don't need this. I'll figure it out myself. I'm sure you will, I replied. That's how real men build businesses. His jaw clenched. Claire looked at me like I'd slapped her. You don't support him. You never have, she snapped. All you do is criticize. I nodded slowly. And all he does is ask for more. You've raised a resume with a pulse, Claire. Not a man. Tyler's face flushed red. I don't have to take this. Good, I said. Because I'm done giving it. He stormed out the front door, muttering something about toxic energy. Claire followed a beat later. No purse, no jacket. Just rage, and that maternal autopilot she always defaults to. She shot me one last glare as she grabbed the handle. You are unbelievable, Ron. And then she was gone. The front door clicked shut. I didn't move. The silence that followed was beautiful. I picked up my coffee again, took another sip, and looked over at the little side table where a yellow envelope still sat under my mousepad. I could have sent it then. I could have burned the whole thing down in that moment. But no. Let them play. Let them dance around the fire. I'd already moved the gasoline. It was a Tuesday morning when George called. Not the kind of call you expect before your second cup of coffee. He didn't even say hello. Just led with, did you hear about Tyler? That's how you know it's bad. When your friend skips the pleasantries and assumes you're already in the loop of your stepson's latest disaster. No, I said, setting down my mug. What about him? George hesitated. He totaled a car. DUI. Nobody hurt. Thank God. But here's the kicker. The car's in Claire's name. I paused. Claire doesn't own a car like that. He borrowed it. On paper, it's a lease under her. Insurance lapsed 2 months ago. Owners pressing charges because technically it wasn't supposed to be loaned out at all. It's a mess. I sat there for a long second, letting it soak in like motor oil into pavement. Claire hadn't said a word. Not last night, not over breakfast, not even in passing while she told me all about Tyler's upcoming pitch to some seed investor. Nothing. And now this. George cleared his throat. Figured you knew already. My bad. No, George, I said, reaching for a pen. You're the first to tell me, and I appreciate it. He hung up a few minutes later. I stayed seated, staring out the window, watching 2 squirrels fight over a bird feeder I hadn't refilled in weeks. The kind of meaningless little drama you ignore until one of them chews through your power line. I didn't confront Claire. Didn't mention it. That night, she made us dinner chicken something, heavy on the cream sauce. She was talkative, upbeat, almost too upbeat. Her eyes flicked toward mine every now and then, like she was checking for signs. Signs of what? I couldn't tell. Guilt? Suspicion? Or just hoping I hadn't heard yet? I'm thinking of surprising Tyler with a weekend trip, she said mid-bite. Just mother-son time. You know, before he gets all busy with the startup. I nodded, chewing slowly. Sounds good. He could use a break. She smiled. Relieved. It was fascinating. The calm before a collapse. Later that night, after she went to bed, I went into the den and opened the folder again. Line drawn. I didn't need to do much. Just one revision. A clean stroke on a document I'd already updated 3 times this month. My will. There used to be a contingency line. In the event of Claire Hanley's predeceasing me, the following assets shall be transferred to her son, Tyler James. That line had once been a gesture of goodwill. A bone toss to the idea of family unity. I removed it. No second thoughts. No anger. Just a quiet flick of the mouse, a save, and a printed copy filed into the new stack marked final. I then emailed the revised version to my attorney with the subject line, updated per current circumstances. No explanation. He wouldn't need one. Claire didn't ask why I didn't come to bed that night. She assumed I was in one of my moods. She'd learned long ago not to poke when I went quiet, mistaking silence for submission. But silence has flavors. And this one? This one tasted like leverage. Because she hadn't told me about the accident. Because she was waiting to see if I'd offer. Because she already knew the answer. And she wasn't ready to hear it out loud. The phone started ringing at 8:43 a.m. Not once. Not twice. 16 times. Back to back. I watched it buzz from the kitchen counter as I sliced through a Honeycrisp, each ring stacking over the next like a pileup on a highway. Claire, mobile, it flashed, insistent. I let it buzz. By the 7th ring, I'd finished slicing the apple and set the knife down beside the sink. By the 12th, I was pouring myself coffee. The voicemail pinged just as I stirred in the cream. She didn't lead with hi, didn't lead with please. Her voice was tight, frayed at the edges. Ron, it's urgent. Tyler's bail's been set. 15,000. He can't stay there. This is a mistake. You know he's not a bad person. He just panicked. Please, call me back. She didn't hang up. She just trailed off like a dial tone, then silence. I sat down, coffee in one hand, her voice lingering in the other. 10 minutes later, a text came through. Just a photo, a partially filled out liquidation form for an annuity we'd opened 5 years ago, back when she still called us partners. I knew that annuity. It was hers, technically. But at the time, my signature had been required to initiate it under the joint tax shelter structure. The form was missing just one thing, my signature. Then came the next message. It's in both our names. You just need to sign. I'll fill in the rest. Please. I didn't reply. 2 hours passed. By noon, I'd received an email from the notary service she used. Routine, impersonal. A form rejection. Transaction incomplete. Cosigner unavailable. There was a PDF attached. She'd filled everything out except the signature line and uploaded my old digital initials from another document. Tried to preload them into the e-signature slot. Sloppy. Desperate. I forwarded the email to my attorney with one line. No action. Just FYI. Another call. This one from a number I didn't recognize, local area code, but masked. Voicemail again. Ron, it's Claire. They won't release him without it. You can just sign electronically. You don't even have to speak to me. I'm not asking you to pay. I'm just asking you to help me unlock what's already mine. Please. She emphasized mine like that would make me flinch. I didn't. Instead, I opened the drawer in my study and pulled out the folder again. Not the legal one, another one. Older. Thinner. Inside it were photos. Photos from Tyler's launch party last year. The one where he announced a startup that never started, raised $0, and somehow still found the budget to host an open bar and hire a DJ. I'd gone, stupidly. Posed in one photo, half smiling next to Claire while Tyler gave a speech slurring halfway through. Another voicemail hit my phone. This one wasn't Claire. It was Tyler. Look, man, Ron. I know we've had, friction or whatever. But this is serious, all right? You've got the power to make this go away. Don't be petty. He hung up before the minute mark. Not even a thank you baked into the manipulation. I didn't call back. I didn't text. I just picked up the remote and flipped on the news. There it was, bottom ticker. Local man arrested in DUI crash faces felony property damage. They hadn't used his name yet, but they would, eventually. And when they did, it wouldn't be a family crisis. It would be a press release. So I muted the volume, leaned back, and let the silence do what it always does best. Answer. The first 12 calls I ignored. By the time the 16th came through, I had already silenced the phone and left it face down on the kitchen table. The screen lit up like a strobe every few minutes, vibrating across the wood until it finally gave up and sat still. I didn't move. I was on the porch, watching dust crawl over the lawn. Another call came through while I was pouring bourbon. Claire again. Then Tyler. Then a number I didn't recognize, some bail bondsman's office, probably. The kind of place where dreams go to die slowly in fluorescent lighting. By nightfall, the number stood at 28 missed calls. 12 from Claire. 7 from Tyler. The rest were an ugly bouquet of unknowns and desperation. I opened the voicemail app. I don't know why, curiosity maybe, or just the part of me that wanted to hear how low they'd been their knees. The first message was Claire's, voice trembling with artificial fury. Ron, you can't just ignore this. Tyler's your family too. You helped raise him. You loved him. This isn't you. This is spiteful. You're punishing me through him, and it's cruel. Don't do this. I listened, silent, then pressed delete. The second message was Tyler's, more venom than voice. I swear to God, you're pathetic. You act like some stoic big man, but you're just bitter. You think this makes you strong? It makes you weak. You're nothing to me. Never were. Delete. The third was Claire again, trying a different tactic. I don't even need the full amount, just something to get the process moving. I'm selling the Lexus, but I need time. Please, Ron. I know we've said things, but I still do. Delete. The fourth. I didn't even listen to. I saved that energy. Instead, I opened the audio app on my phone and scrolled down to a file I hadn't touched since the night I labeled that folder line drawn. A voice memo. 32 seconds long. It played quietly through the speaker as I stared into the darkness. Claire's voice. Tipsy. Sharp. Recorded while she stood in the kitchen on a call with a friend I never liked. Some divorcee named Dana who believed therapy could be replaced with red wine and retail. Ron? Oh, come on. He's like an old sweater. Familiar, sure. Comfortable, fine. But Tyler? Tyler matters. Ron doesn't. He never really did. He just came with the house. I listened to that sentence again. And again. He just came with the house. I'd recorded it by accident while testing the voice memo app one day. Meant to delete it. Forgot. But when I replayed it weeks later, I saved it. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. Because that moment, the casual cruelty of it, had stripped away every inch of gray. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But I wasn't after revenge. Not really. I was just done feeding people who sharpened their knives at my table. I closed the app, stood, and walked back into the house. The phone blinked once more. Another voicemail. Another plea. Another rope tossed from the deck of a sinking ship. I didn't answer. Let them drown in the echo they created. She came in like weather, fast, loud, and without warning. It was just past 11 a.m. when I looked up from the quarterly portfolio review and saw her through the glass wall of my office. Claire. Hair a mess. No makeup. Eyes wide with the kind of desperation that makes people clench their purses in public. She didn't ask to be let in. Didn't check in with the receptionist. She just stormed through the floor like she still had a key to my world. One of the interns tried to stop her. Poor kid looked like he was about to cry. She brushed past him and slammed my door open so hard it hit the coat rack behind it. You blocked the account. I didn't flinch. Didn't look up right away either. Just finished underlining a line item on the report in front of me. Then I looked at her. Morning, Claire. She was shaking. From anger or adrenaline, or maybe just the come down of realizing charm and tears weren't working anymore. You son of a bitch, she hissed. I needed that money. I leaned back in my chair. Which money? The annuity. You know which. I had it lined up. I had the buyer. Now it's stalled and I've got calls from bond officers, and she caught herself, glancing around. My assistant, 2 associates, and 1 HR rep had all poked their heads out of offices like meerkats. Phones weren't ringing. Keyboards weren't clacking. Silence had made itself comfortable. Claire turned back to me, breath hitching. I stood by you when your back went out, remember? 3 months you couldn't walk, and I was there. You owe me. That last part came out like a screech. Like she thought if she made the word loud enough, it would manifest into truth. I looked at her for a long second. Long enough for her to think I might soften. I didn't. Instead, I stood slowly. Not angry. Just measured. You stood by me, I said quietly, while standing on me. Dead silence. I saw something flicker in her eyes. Shame. Or maybe recognition. But before it could calcify into regret, I looked past her and said, Sam, would you please call building security? Claire's mouth dropped open. Are you kidding me? I didn't respond. Just gathered my papers into a stack and clipped them together neatly. The same way you might do before ending a meeting you know you'll never reschedule. She spun to the room behind her. Seriously? You're all just going to watch him do this? I gave up everything for him. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. One woman picked up her phone, not to call, but to film. That was when Claire realized where she was. Not at home. Not in private. Not in a place where Tyler's name made people bend. Here, she was just noise. Security arrived 4 minutes later. By then, she'd gone quiet. But it didn't matter. They escorted her through the office, 2 calm, firm men in navy jackets. She didn't resist. Just kept muttering under her breath. The video went up on a local Facebook community group within hours. Wife goes nuclear in office meltdown. Over 14,000 views before dinner. The comments weren't kind. One said, imagine being this unhinged because your husband cut off the gravy train. Another, that man's calm gave me chills. Legend. I didn't comment. I didn't share. I didn't even like the post, but I watched it. Twice. And when Claire called again that night, I didn't answer. She had her audience already. She just didn't like the reviews. The dining room at the club was warm with low laughter, the hum of good scotch, and the clink of silverware on china. 12 of us sat at a long table under a vaulted ceiling, friends, colleagues, old golf partners, and one neighbor who still mailed birthday cards. They toasted with a mix of ribbing and affection. 64 years old, they said. Still upright, still sharp. Not a soul asked where Claire was. Because they knew. Or rather, they understood enough to stop asking. When the waiter came around with the second bottle of Macallan, I leaned back in my chair and let it all wash over me. The low jazz, the smell of butter-seared filet, the faint whisper of someone's story about a fishing trip that ended with a broken reel and 2 hours of silence in the truck ride home. Real stories. From men who'd been broken and patched themselves up without needing applause. Halfway through dessert, my phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I let it sit there for a moment. The hum against my chest reminded me of a different kind of silence, the kind that had ruled my house for years. The kind you mistake for peace until you realize it's just resignation. After coffee, I excused myself and stepped outside to the patio. The sky was deepening into that purple-gray dusk that makes you think of final acts. I pulled out my phone and checked the screen. Tyler, can't believe you threw a party and didn't invite Mom. You're disgusting. The message didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was how fast my thumbs moved. Ron. Second place doesn't pay. That was it. No anger. No flourish. Just truth. I watched the message send. Delivered. Read. 2 minutes later, someone screenshotted it. I know because one of Claire's friends, Debbie, from her yoga studio, forwarded me the image that same night, along with a message. Just so you know, it's all over the wine and wellness group chat. Mixed reactions. But mostly, applause. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The screenshot made its way from phone to phone faster than any apology Claire ever managed in our marriage. It hit group chats, Facebook Messenger threads. A couple of friends in the club showed it to each other mid-toast like it was a secret weapon. One guy leaned over to me, eyes twinkling. That was cold, he said. I mean that as a compliment. The text was everywhere by morning. Tyler tried to spin it, of course, said I was heartless, manipulative, bitter. But even his usual defenders were quieter than usual. Because deep down, they remembered Claire's smug little toasts. The digs. The way she always called me practical, which was her version of calling me dull. The way she once joked, Ron's retirement plan is me, and laughed like she'd invented humor. Now, that crowd was shifting. Some women stopped calling. Others texted me behind her back. You deserve better. Always liked you more. She's always acted like the room was hers. One even sent me a photo of an old Christmas party. I was standing by the piano. Claire was across the room, ignoring me entirely. The caption just said, "Funny what you start to see in hindsight." That night, I sat in the living room with a glass of scotch, watching the fire dance in the hearth. I didn't play music, didn't turn on the TV, just sat with the silence. But this silence? It didn't feel like resignation. It felt like freedom. The arraignment happened on a Wednesday. Rain, of course. Nothing poetic. Just the miserable kind that makes courthouse stairs feel steeper. Tyler stood in front of the judge in a wrinkled blazer someone clearly lent him that morning. His lawyer, a public defender barely old enough to shave, tried to make the case that Tyler was rebuilding his life, that the DUI was a wake-up call, and that bail should reflect his strong community ties. The prosecutor laughed. Literally. On record. Because Tyler's community record was a stack of past due notices, failed LLC filings, and one documented incident of screaming at a rental manager for charging him cleaning fees. The crash alone had resulted in nearly 20 grand in damages, and the car, technically leased in Claire's name, had violated its usage terms in 5 different ways. The judge didn't need long. Bail is set at $30,000. The gavel cracked. Tyler blinked hard. Claire, seated behind the bar, gasped. She reached for her purse like it held 30 grand in rolled-up 20s. She tried to whisper to the attorney. He shook his head. They weren't talking payment plans. That night, she called everyone. Again. Siblings. Old friends. Her hairstylist. The yoga teacher with the podcast. Anyone who had once clinked a wine glass and called her soul sister. No one answered. One friend finally texted back. I can't loan money I won't get back. I hope you understand. Claire was spiraling. The Lexus went up for sale on Craigslist before midnight. Price to move. She sent a group text out at 1:04 a.m. with a photo of the listing. Selling my car. Need cash urgently. If you know anyone, please share. By morning, a buyer responded. Cash offer. Coming that day. She texted Tyler at 7:43 a.m. We're going to get you out. I promise. She texted me at 7:45 a.m. You're letting your pride hurt my child. This isn't who you are. Please. I read it while folding laundry. Matching socks. Calmly. At 9:12 a.m., she messaged again. He's scared. He's not eating. Just sign the damn form, Ron. But I wasn't at home anymore. I was in the car. Driving. Nowhere in particular, just around. Letting the wind pull through the crack in the window while I played jazz from the 60s. The stuff I never got to play in the house because she called it elevator music. At 10:37 a.m., the buyer canceled. His bank flagged something about a lien mismatch. Claire texted him 4 times. He ghosted. At 11:04, she called again. 5 times. Then once more from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring. By noon, I was at a diner I liked. One she always said smelled like grease and regret. I ordered the club sandwich. Took my time. Finished every bite. Then I opened my phone and drafted the message. No venom. No flourish. Just this. You wanted to stand on your own. So stand. Sent. Read. No reply. I set the phone face down and paid in cash. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sun broke through just enough to catch in the wet pavement. Reflections everywhere. Everything upside down, but clear. It was just past midnight when the phone buzzed. Once, then again. Then it rang. Claire. I let it ring once. Twice. I almost didn't answer. Not out of spite. Just tired of reruns. But something in me wanted to hear it. Not for closure. Not even for satisfaction. Just to mark the end with something concrete. A voice. A final scream in the dark. I picked up on the 4th ring. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask if I was awake. She just exploded. Wet, frantic, feral. He's in jail, Ron. He's been in there for 3 days. He's your stepson, for God's sake. What is wrong with you? I sat in the dark, the phone cold against my cheek. Her voice cracked. Screeched. You could hear the mascara running through the receiver. You're just going to let him rot? You cold. Empty. Man. She broke into sobs mid-sentence, the kind that hiccup and twist into rage again. I could picture her in their old kitchen, the one I renovated, pacing in circles with the cordless phone against her ear like it was a lifeline she was slowly strangling herself with. You helped raise him, she shrieked. You taught him to drive. He called you Ron Dad when he was little. You think that means nothing. I waited. Not long. Just enough to let the silence press between us like a weight. Then I exhaled. Claire, I said quietly, almost kindly. You said I'm second place. She stopped. Nothing but a thin static hum between us now. No crying. No yelling. Just that. So I finished. And second place doesn't pay. Click. The line went dead. No final gasp. No threat. No apology. Just silence. And this time, she didn't call back.
The moment I realized my life was a lie wasn't marked by some dramatic reveal. It wasn't Sarah crying in guilt or a secret text lighting up her phone in the middle of the night. No, it was something quieter. Something that at first seemed so harmless, so mundane that I almost missed it entirely. It started at the kitchen table one evening. Jason and I were discussing his college options while Sarah flipped through the mail. She'd been distant lately, but I chalked it up to work stress, or maybe the looming reality of Jason leaving for college. She tossed a thin envelope onto the table with a little too much force, and it caught Jason's attention. What's that? He asked, picking it up before I could even glance at it. Nothing, Sarah said quickly, a little too quickly. Just some stupid junk mail. Jason wasn't convinced. He opened the envelope and what he pulled out made the air in the room feel heavier. It was a glossy flyer for a family reunion. Not my family, not hers. At least, not as far as I knew. But the last name at the top of the invite was hauntingly familiar, Turner. My cousin's last name. Why is this in our mail? Jason asked, his forehead wrinkling. We're not Turners? Sarah's face froze for a split second. Then she laughed, the sound brittle. like it was held together by desperation. Must be some kind of mistake. Probably meant for a neighbor. But Jason wasn't buying it. And neither was I. Something about her reaction. It wasn't just nervous, it was panicked. The kind of panic you see when someone knows the truth is too close to the surface. I tried to shake it off, but that name Turner stuck with me. My cousin Brad Turner lived 2 states away. We weren't close, but we'd see each other at weddings and funerals. The kind of family ties you don't think too hard about until they're in front of your face. And now they were, literally staring back at me on this flyer. That night, I found myself spiraling. Memories, flashes of things I'd overlooked for years, came rushing back. Sarah's weird excuses whenever Brad came up in conversation. The way she used to go quiet at family gatherings if he was around. The one time she forgot to tell me he'd visited our town for a weekend, back when Jason was a baby. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Why would I? But now, every detail felt like a breadcrumb leading to something I didn't want to find. The next day, I called Brad. It was casual at first. I told him about the flyer, asked if he'd send it our way. He seemed confused, then laughed. "That's funny," he said. "I didn't send it, but I guess I could have told Sarah about it when we talked last month. She mentioned you guys were thinking about visiting soon." The ground dropped out from under me. "Last month?" I asked, my voice steady only because I forced it to be. "Yeah." She called about Jason's college stuff. Said she wanted some advice on how to help him figure out what he wanted to study. I ended the call as fast as I could without raising suspicion. My heart was racing, my stomach churning. Sarah hadn't mentioned calling Brad. She hadn't mentioned him at all in years. Why would she go to him for advice about Jason? And why didn't she tell me? I decided not to confront her right away. Instead, I needed proof, real proof. Something more than a flyer or a phone call. I needed to know the truth, not just for me, but for Jason. If there was even a chance this went deeper than I feared, I had to be sure. That's when I ordered the DNA test for both of us. And when the results came in, I realized I wasn't even close to ready for what they would reveal. When the DNA test results came back, I felt like I was staring at the end of my own story. The words on the screen were clinical and unfeeling, but they might as well have been written in fire. The report didn't mince words. I wasn't Jason's biological father. There it was, in stark black and white, the kind of truth you can't argue with. I sat there, the quiet hum of my laptop filling the silence, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the mouse. But the results raised more questions than answers. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it all. If not me, then who? The Turner name on the flyer. Brad's casual mention of Sarah calling him. Pieces of a puzzle that didn't make a picture yet, but felt like they would if I just turned one more piece the right way. For the next 2 days, I said nothing. Not to Sarah, not to Jason. I was operating on autopilot. Every interaction with her a silent battle hide the hurricane inside me. She must have noticed something was off because she kept asking if I was okay. Her tone almost annoyingly cheerful. Every time she did, I wanted to scream. But Instead, I spent those 2 days pulling every thread I could find. I went through old photo albums, text histories, and even emails. I wanted something, anything that would explain this. It was in an old storage box buried in the attic that I found what I was looking for. A stack of faded Polaroids from a family barbecue nearly 18 years ago, just a month before Jason was born. There, in the center of one photo, was Sarah. She was laughing, her hand resting casually on Brad's arm. It wasn't overt, but the way she looked at him hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just familiar. Too comfortable. And Brad. His expression mirrored hers. That was the first time I felt rage boiling under the surface. It was like a dam had cracked, and every suppressed thought, every ignored red flag, came flooding back. I had no idea how far this went, but I was done pretending nothing was wrong. The next evening I came home early. Sarah was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepped dinner. She smiled when she saw me, the kind of smile that once made my whole day. Now it just felt hollow. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice sharp enough to make her stop mid-chop. She set the knife down slowly, turning to me with a look that was half confusion, half concern. "What's going on?" I didn't bother with a warm-up. "Jason isn't my son." But the words hung in the air like a thunderclap. For a moment, her expression didn't change, like her brain was still processing what I'd just said. Then, the color drained from her face. "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice trembling just enough to give her away. "I took a DNA test. Jason isn't mine. And I think you know exactly what I'm talking about." She opened her mouth to speak but closed it again. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything to anchor herself. Finally, she settled on anger. "This is insane," she snapped. "You're seriously accusing me of what? Cheating on you? After all these years?" "I'm not accusing you of anything," I shot back, my voice rising. "The DNA test already told me the truth. I just want to hear it from you. Her mask cracked then. Just for a second. A flash of panic crossed her face before she schooled her features into something cold distant. You're being ridiculous, she said, turning back to the cutting board. I'm not having this conversation. But I wasn't letting her off the hook, not this time. Was it, Brad? I demanded, my voice sharp enough to make her flinch. Is that why you've been so cagey about him all these years? Is Jason his? The knife in her hand clattered to the counter as she spun around, her face a mix of shock and fury. How dare you, she hissed. Brad is your cousin, that's disgusting. Disgusting. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh even to my own ears. You're the one who's been lying to me for 17 years. Who knows what else is disgusting? Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she might slap me. But instead, she just stood there, trembling with barely restrained anger. I'm not doing this, she said finally, her voice low and venomous. If you want to throw away our marriage over some stupid test, go ahead. But don't you dare drag my son into this. Her son. I caught that slip, and it felt like another crack in the dam. But instead of pushing further, I stepped back. For now, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The silence in the house after our confrontation was suffocating. Sarah retreated to the bedroom, slamming the door like a teenager after a fight, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the heavy weight of everything I still didn't know. Her refusal to engage. Her deflection, her anger. It wasn't guiltless. I'd been married to this woman long enough to know when she was lying. But what gnawed at me more than her denial was the growing certainty of what the truth might be. Brad. The signs had been there, faint whispers in the background of my life until the DNA test brought them screaming into focus. My own blood. If Jason was his, it wasn't just a betrayal. It was an insult, a taunt that had sat unnoticed in my own house for 17 years. I wasn't just angry, I was humiliated. That night I barely slept. By morning I had made up my mind. If Sarah wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. And if Brad was the answer, then I wasn't just going to confront him, I was going to destroy him. The first step was subtle. I didn't want Sarah or Jason suspecting anything yet. At breakfast, I acted like everything was fine, even joking with Jason about a college he was interested in. Sarah kept glancing at me like she expected another explosion, but I gave her nothing. Let her stew. At work, I made an excuse to leave early. I wasn't going home, though. Instead, I drove 2 hours to Brad's town, where I knew he ran a small automotive shop. I'd only been there once before, years ago, when Sarah suggested we stop in while visiting her friend in the area. At the time, I hadn't thought twice about it. Now, that memory felt like another piece of the puzzle. I parked a block away and walked to the shop, keeping my head down. Brad was there, laughing with one of his mechanics over a joke I couldn't hear. He hadn't changed much. Still broad-shouldered, still carrying himself with that cocky confidence that had irritated me since we were kids. I waited until the mechanic walked away, leaving Brad leaning against a car, scrolling through his phone. Hey, Brad, I said, my voice steady despite the storm building inside me. He looked up surprised. For a second, his smile faltered. Then he grinned. Man. What brings you out, Kay? I walked closer, closing the distance between us. Funny you should ask. He tilted his head, confused. What's going on? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the DNA results. I unfolded it slowly, letting him see the header atop before I slapped it onto the hood of the car he was working on. You want to explain this? I asked, my voice low but sharp. Brad glanced at the paper, his brow furrowing. What is this? It's a DNA test, I said. It says Jason isn't my son. For the first time, Brad looked genuinely startled. His eyes darted from the paper to me, then back again. Wait, what? Are you serious? Dead serious, I said, stepping closer. And the more I think about it, the more your name keeps coming up. So, I'll ask you again. Do you want to explain this? He raised his hands defensively, his expression shifting from shock to something more guarded. Look, I don't know what you're accusing me of, but I swear, I had nothing to do with this. Did you sleep with Sarah? I demanded, my voice rising. He hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Look, man, that was a long time ago. It didn't mean anything. I didn't let him finish. My fist connected with his jaw before I even realized I'd moved. He stumbled back, crashing into the car, and I grabbed him by the collar, yanking him upright. I snarled. How long were you screwing my wife behind my back? Just stop. He choked out, raising his hands again. It was one time, okay? One time, and it was stupid. I didn't even think, I swear, I didn't know Jason was mine. The words hit me like a second punch, this time aimed straight at my chest. I let go of him, stepping back as the reality of what he'd just admitted sank in. Jason was his, my son. The boy I'd raised, the boy I'd poured my life into wasn't mine. He was Brad's. The room spun for a moment, and I had to grip the edge of the car to steady myself. Brad was saying something, some pathetic attempt at an apology, but I barely heard him. My vision tunneled, my mind locking onto a single thought. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I left Brad's shop with my knuckles throbbing and my thoughts racing. The confession played on repeat in my head, each word scraping against my sanity like nails on a chalkboard. One time, I didn't know Jason was mine. Liar. I didn't believe him for a second. Brad wasn't the type to take responsibility unless he was cornered. And even then, he only gave up what he thought would shut you down. But his reaction confirmed everything I needed to know. The truth wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was real, and it was ugly. As I drove back home, I realized the weight of what this meant. Jason wasn't just Brad's son. He was the product of an affair between my wife and my cousin. Two people I had trusted more than anyone else in the world. And yet, for 17 years, they had lied to me, let me live a life built on betrayal. The anger I felt in Brad's shop hadn't subsided. If anything, it was evolving. Sharper, colder, more calculated. Brad might have thought his apology ended things, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. When I got home, the house was quiet. Jason was at a friend's, and Sarah was in the living room, scrolling on her phone like nothing had happened. She didn't look up when I walked in. I went to see Brad, I said, my voice steady but laced with purpose. That got her attention. She froze, her fingers hovering above the screen, then slowly set the phone down.
What?
You heard me, I said, stepping closer. I went to his shop and asked him about Jason. You know what he told me? Her face paled, her composure crumbling as she realized there was no way out of this. I don't know what you're talking about, she said weakly, but her voice was shaking. Cut the crap, Sarah. I snapped, my patience gone. He admitted it. He told me everything. Her eyes darted to the side like she was searching for an escape, but there was nowhere to run. Slowly, she stood, wrapping her arms around herself like the act could shield her from what was coming. It was a mistake, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. It happened one time, and it didn't mean anything. Don't, I said, cutting her off. Don't you dare try to minimize this. You slept with my cousin. You lied to me for 17 years. You let me believe Jason was mine. Do you have any idea what you've done? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel even a flicker of sympathy. Not anymore. I didn't know, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't know Jason wasn't yours. I swear I thought. You thought you could get away with it. I finished for her. And you almost did. She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. But I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. All I could think about was how I had wasted nearly 2 decades of my life on someone who didn't deserve it. I'm sorry, she said between sobs. I'm so sorry. But sorry wasn't enough this time. Over the next few days, I started putting the pieces of my plan together. Revenge wasn't just a possibility anymore, it was a necessity. But it had to be perfect. I didn't want to lash out blindly and ruin everything in the process. No, this needed to hurt the way I'd been hurt, to destroy the carefully constructed lives they had built at my expense. Sarah thought she was off the hook after our confrontation. She started acting like things could go back to normal, cooking dinner, making small talk, even suggesting we take a family trip before Jason left for college. I played along, pretending to consider her ideas, but every smile I gave her was a weapon I planned to use later. Meanwhile, I was gathering information. I pulled financial records, text histories, even social media posts from years back. Anything that could give me leverage. And then there was Jason. He deserved the truth, but not yet. Not until I was ready to show him exactly who his real father was. I started with Brad. If he thought admitting to the affair would save him, he was about to learn how wrong he was. Because I wasn't just going to expose him, I was going to ruin him. I knew I couldn't rush this. If I wanted my revenge to truly land, it had to be precise, brutal, irreversible. Brad was my first target. He had no idea I wasn't done with him. No idea that my confrontation at the shop was just the beginning. His confession had handed me the ammunition I needed, but I wasn't going to waste it on something as simple as a public blowout. No, Brad was going to feel this where it hurt the most. It started with his business. Brad's shop wasn't anything fancy, just a small-town operation that thrived on its reputation. Loyal customers, word-of-mouth referrals. That's what kept him afloat. So, I decided to strip him of it. I created an anonymous account on a local review site and began leaving detailed, scathing posts about shady dealings at Brad's shop. Claims about overcharging customers, using cheap parts, and even accidentally damaging cars to drum up more repairs. Each review was carefully worded, just believable enough to raise doubts but vague to avoid suspicion. Within a week, his 5-star rating was down to a shaky 3. But that was just the appetizer. I knew Brad had a weakness for shortcuts, both in life and in business. Digging into his records, I found what I was looking for, A few quiet infractions he'd brushed under the rug: improper waste disposal, unlicensed employees, cutting corners on inspections. I sent an anonymous tip to the state licensing board, along with a neat little file of supporting evidence. The investigation hit his shop like a wrecking ball. Inspectors showed up unannounced, combing through everything from invoices to inventory. Word spread fast in a town that small, and before long, customers started canceling appointments. I heard from an old friend that Brad was furious, stumping around the shop and snapping at his staff. Good. That was just the start. At home, Sarah was trying to act like nothing had changed, but the tension between us was impossible to ignore. She still didn't know about my plans, or the depths of my fury. I kept up the facade, smiling when I needed to, engaging in polite conversation, but inside I was a coiled spring. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, she tried to breach the subject again. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice tentative. "Maybe we should go to counseling. To work through everything." I set my fork down, leveling her with a cold stare. "Counseling won't fix this, Sarah." She flinched like I'd struck her, but she didn't argue. "It was a mistake," she said quietly, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "I know I hurt you, but don't you think Jason deserves to have his parents together for his last year at home?" Her words were like gasoline on a fire. Parents. She wanted to talk about parenting after what she'd done. I almost lost it right there, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I think Jason deserves the truth," I said instead, my voice sharp as glass. She looked up at me, wide-eyed. "You can't tell him," she said quickly, panic creeping into her tone. I asked, leaning back in my chair. "He deserves to know where he really comes from. Don't you think?" She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "Please," she whispered. "I'll destroy him." I stood, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "The way you destroyed me," I said, my voice cold. "This isn't about Jason. It's about you not wanting to face what you've done. But don't worry, Sarah. The truth has a way of coming out, whether you like it or not." I left the table then, her muffled sobs following me down the hall. The next phase of my plan was more personal. It was time to make Sarah feel the weight of her choices, not just with words, but with actions. I started by pulling Jason aside the following weekend. We were in the garage, tinkering with his old bike. When I broached the topic, "You've been quietly," I said, keeping my tone casual. Jason shrugged. "Just a lot on my mind, I guess. College stuff." "Yeah, and other things." I nodded, waiting for him to elaborate. He didn't, but the way he avoided my gaze told me there was more going on. "Jason," I said, setting down the wrench, "I need to ask you something important." He frowned, confused. "What's up?" I took a deep breath, bracing myself for what was to come. "If you found out something about our family, something big, would you want to know the truth?" His expression shifted, worry flashing across his face. "What kind of truth?" "The kind that changes everything," I said carefully. Jason hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I'd want to know." That was all I needed to hear. The seed was planted. Sarah thought she could control the narrative, but she underestimated me. The truth was coming, and when it did, it wouldn't just be a revelation. It would be a reckoning. The night I decided to pull the trigger on the truth, the house felt eerily still, as if even the walls were holding their breath. I'd waited long enough. Sarah's betrayal was a wound that festered with every passing day, and Brad's smug, half-hearted apologies weren't enough to quell the storm in my chest. Jason deserved the truth. And so did I. That evening, I asked Sarah and Jason to join me in the living room. Sarah eyed me warily as she sat down, clutching her tea like it was some kind of shield. Jason, oblivious to the tension crackling between us, flopped onto the couch and grabbed his phone. "What's up, Dad?" he asked casually, not even looking up. I took a deep breath, my palms damp with sweat. "There's something we need to talk about. Something I've been keeping to myself, but it's time you knew." Jason finally put his phone down, his expression turning serious. Sarah's face was a mask of dread. "This is about the DNA test," I continued, locking eyes with Jason, his brows knit in confusion. "The DNA test. What about it?" I glanced at Sarah, who was now pale as a ghost. "It showed something I didn't expect, something I need to explain." "Don't do this," Sarah said suddenly, her voice trembling. "Not like this." I ignored her. "Jason, the test revealed that I'm not your biological father." For a moment, the words didn't seem to land. Jason blinked at me, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to process what I'd just said. "What?" he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not your biological father," I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Your mother, she had an affair." "Stop!" Sarah shouted, standing abruptly. "That's enough." "No," I snapped, turning to her. "You don't get to silence me anymore. He deserves to know the truth, and you're not going to stop me from telling him." Jason looked between us, his face a mix of confusion and panic. "Mom, What's he talking about? What? Sarah hesitated, tears streaming down her face. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. I took a step forward, my voice steady. Jason, the man who fathered you is Brad. The silence that followed was deafening. Jason stared at me, then at Sarah, as if searching for some kind of denial, some reassurance that this wasn't real. Brad, he said, his voice cracking. Uncle Brad. Sarah collapsed into the chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Jason turned to her, his expression morphing into something between betrayal and disgust. Tell me he's lying, he demanded. Tell me this isn't true. But Sarah couldn't speak. She just buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Jason shot to his feet. How could you? He shouted at her, his voice breaking. How could you do this to Dad? To me? Jason, please. She sobbed, reaching out to him. He recoiled, his face twisted in anger. Don't touch me. I can't even look at you right now. He turned to me, his eyes pleading. Dad, what are we supposed to do now? The question hit me like a freight train. Jason had always been my son in every way that mattered. Biology didn't change that. But now, standing in the wreckage of everything I thought I knew, I realized I had no easy answers. We take it one step at a time, I said finally, my voice firm. But I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. You're my son, Jason. Nothing will change that. His lip quivered, and for a moment I thought he might cry. But instead, he just nodded, his shoulders slumping as the weight of the revelation settled over him. Sarah didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. Jason stormed off to his room, slamming the door behind him, and I was left alone in the living room with the wreckage of what used to be my family. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app, scrolling through the plans I'd been piecing together for weeks. The financial sabotage, the whispers of Brad's misconduct, the quiet unraveling of everything he held dear. It was all set in motion now. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about reclaiming control. About making sure Brad and Sarah understood the full weight of what they'd done. And as I stared at my screen, a new idea began to form, something bigger, something devastating. Because I wasn't just going to ruin Brad's life. I was going to take everything he cared about and make him watch. The next morning, the house was steeped in a heavy, suffocating silence. Jason hadn't come out of his room since the night before, and Sarah was moving through the kitchen like a ghost, her eyes swollen and red. I didn't say a word to her. There was nothing left to say, at least not yet. I had bigger plans to set in motion. While Sarah busied herself pretending life could go on, I made a few phone calls. The first was to a private investigator I'd found online. A guy with a reputation for being thorough and discreet. I needed to know every skeleton in Brad's closet, every secret he thought he'd buried. If Brad was going to fall, he was going to fall hard, and I wasn't leaving any room for error. The second call was more personal. Hey, it's me, I said when the line connected. Dude, it said Greg, an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. What's up? Greg was a lawyer, good one, and more importantly, someone who owed me a favor. I filled him in on the basics, leaving out the messy details but making it clear that I needed guidance on one specific thing, how to legally dismantle Brad and Sarah without leaving myself exposed. Man, that's rough, Greg said after I finished. But you've got options. A lot of options. He spent the next hour outlining strategies, from financial plays to legal maneuvers, and by the end of the call, I had a roadmap, a blueprint for destruction. At home, the tension between me and Sarah had reached a breaking point. She tried to talk to me again that afternoon, her voice brittle with desperation. I know you're angry, she said, standing in the doorway of my office. But we need to figure out how to fix this. For Jason's sake. I didn't even look up from my laptop. There's no fixing this, Sarah.
Oh, don't say that.
She snapped, her tone shifting to frustration. We've been married for almost 20 years. You're just going to throw that away. I leaned back in my chair, finally meeting her gaze. You threw it away the second you decided to sleep with Brad, and then you buried it for 17 years while I raised his son. Do you even realize what you've done? Her face crumpled, but I didn't stop. You didn't just betray me, I continued. You betrayed Jason. You stole his right to know who he really is. And for what? Because you couldn't keep your hands off my cousin. She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand. Save it. I'm done listening to your excuses. From now on, we're done talking about this. She stared at me for a moment, then turned and left without another word. That night, the investigator called with his first update. You were right, he said, his voice crackling through the phone. Your cousin's got some skeletons, and they're not as buried as he thinks. He walked me through the details: unpaid debts, a messy history with women that included more than one allegation of harassment, and a questionable business deal that bordered on outright fraud. Anything illegal? I asked, my heart pounding. Not yet, he said, But I'm digging. If there's something, I'll find it. It was a start. The next phase of my plan came together quickly. Brad was hosting a family barbecue that weekend, something he'd planned months ago. Normally, I'd avoid his gatherings like the plague, but this time I had a reason to go. When I arrived, Jason came with me. He hadn't wanted to, but I insisted. You need to face this, I told him. You deserve answers. The barbecue was in full swing when we pulled up. Brad greeted us with his usual cocky grin, but the second his eyes met mine, I saw the flicker of unease. Didn't expect to see you here, he said, clapping me on the shoulder like we were old friends. I forced a smile. Wouldn't miss it for the world. We made small talk for a while, circling each other like predators waiting to strike. Finally, I saw my opening. I stood in the center of the yard raising my glass.
Hey, everyone!
I just want to say a few words. The chatter died down as the family turned to look at me. Brad shifted uncomfortably, his smile faltering. I've always been proud to call this family mine, I began, my voice steady. But recently I learned something that changed everything. Something that made me question what family really means. Brad's face went pale. I found out. I continued, my gaze locking on his, that not everyone here values family the same way I do. The tension was electric. Sarah, standing off to the side, looked like she might faint. Jason stared at me, wide-eyed, as if daring me to keep going, but I didn't. Not yet. This wasn't the moment for the truth. This was the moment to let them all know it was coming. To family, I said finally, raising my glass. The crowd murmured their agreement, but Brad's hands were trembling as he lifted his drink he knew. And I wasn't done yet. The barbecue became a silent battlefield after my toast. Conversations resumed, but they were quieter now, punctuated by curious glances in my direction and nervous shifts in Brad's posture. He was pretending everything was fine, laughing too loud, gripping his beer too tight, but I could see the tension radiating off him. Good, let him sweat. Jason stayed by my side, his eyes darting between me and Brad like he was trying to piece together the puzzle I had only half revealed. Sarah, meanwhile, kept her distance, hovering at the edges of the yard with a forced smile plastered across her face. She was trying to keep up appearances, but every now and then, her mask would slip, revealing the fear underneath. I didn't say another word about the truth during the event. That wasn't the point of my toast. The point was to unsettle them, to let them know that I was in control now. The real reckoning would come later. But the moment came sooner than I expected. As the sun dipped below the horizon and people began trickling out, Brad cornered me near the grill. His grin was gone, replaced by a strained expression that barely masked his panic. "Can we talk?" he asked, keeping his voice low. I sipped my drink, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him squirm. "Sure," I said, finally setting my glass down. He led me around the side of the house, away from the dwindling crowd. When we were out of earshot, he turned to me, his jaw tight. What the hell was he demanded? What was what? I asked, fending ignorance. "That toast," he snapped. "You know what I'm talking about." I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. "If you're feeling guilty, Brad, that's on you." His nostrils flared, and for a moment, I thought he might take a swing at me. But he didn't. Instead, he dropped his voice even lower, his words coming out in a harsh whisper. "Look, I told you it was a mistake, okay? I told you it didn't mean anything. What else do you want from me?" I let his words hang in the air, watching as his bravado cracked. "What do I want?" I repeated, stepping closer. "I want you to know that this isn't going away. I want you to understand that you don't get to bury this and move on like nothing happened." His face darkened. "You think you're better than me," he hissed. "You think you're some saint. Newsflash. Man, nobody's perfect. Not even you." I smiled and slow and deliberate. "You're right, Brad. Nobody's perfect. But some of us don't destroy our own family for a cheap thrill." His jaw clenched, and he looked like he was about to say something, but then Jason's voice cut through the tension. "Dad." We both turned to see Jason standing a few feet away, his face pale and his eyes wide. "What's going on?" he asked, looking between us. Brad stepped back, his expression shifting into something that almost resembled guilt. I didn't give him the chance to answer. "Jason," I said, my voice calm, "this is between me and Brad. Go back inside." But Jason didn't move. His gaze locked onto Brad, suspicion dawning in his eyes. "Why are you arguing? Is this about what you said last night?" I hesitated, torn between protecting Jason and letting the truth come out on its own. Before I could decide, Brad made the mistake of opening his mouth. It said quickly, his tone overly casual. "Your dad and I just..." "Don't lie to him," I snapped, cutting him off. Jason's head whipped toward me, his confusion deepening. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath, knowing there was no turning back now. Jay said, meeting his eyes, "Me deserve to know the truth. Brad isn't just your uncle. He's your biological father. The words landed like a bomb. Jason stared at me, then at Brad, then back at me. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Finally, he took a step back, shaking his head. No, he said, his voice cracking. No, that's not. It's true, I said gently, my heart breaking at the look on his face. I'm sorry, son. Jason turned to Brad, his expression shifting from disbelief to fury. Is it true? He demanded, his voice rising. Brad's silence was all the answer Jason needed. Are you kidding me? Jason shouted. How could you do this? How could you lie to me my whole life? Jason, I didn't know. Brad started, but Jason wasn't having it. Don't, he snapped. Just don't. You're nothing to me. With that, he turned and stormed off, leaving Brad and me standing in the dark. Brad looked at me, his face a mix of anger and despair. You happy now? He spat. I smiled, cold and unrelenting. Not yet, but I will be. But then I walked away, leaving him to stew in the mess he'd made. The first domino had fallen, and there were plenty more to come. The morning after my confrontation with Brad, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The path forward was clear now, and there was no room for hesitation. My plan wasn't about rage anymore. It was about justice. Justice for the life they'd stolen from me, for the years of lies I'd unknowingly carried. It started with the folder of evidence, the one that detailed Brad's illegal activities and unethical business practices. I reached out to the investigator one last time, ensuring every piece of it was airtight. This wasn't going to be a warning shot. This was going to be a direct hit. By midday, I had emailed the folder to the state licensing board, several local news outlets, and a couple of Brad's business partners, people who'd have no choice but to act on what they saw. It was a deliberate move. I wanted the fallout to be slow and public, for Brad to feel the walls close in on him piece by piece. That evening, I received a text from one of our extended family members. Hey, did you see this? Attached was a screenshot of a local news article with the headline, "A local mechanic under investigation for fraud and environmental violations." Brad's name and business were front and center. I didn't reply, but I couldn't stop the smirk that crept across my face. The story was out, and there was no pulling it back now. The next day, I took Jason out for lunch. He'd been quiet since the barbecue, but I could tell he was trying to process everything. Over burgers and fries, I decided it was time to open up. I need to tell you something, I said, setting my drink down. About Brad. Jason stiffened, his eyes narrowing. What about him? He's not just your biological father, I said. He's also a liar and a fraud. Everything he's built is crumbling because of the choices he's made. Jason blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean? I explained everything. His illegal deals, the environmental violations, and how the evidence was already making waves. Jason listened intently, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding. So, you're taking him down? He asked, a hint of awe in his voice. I'm showing him the consequences of his actions, I said. But this isn't about revenge anymore. It's about accountability. People like Brad get to walk through life hurting others without facing the fallout. Jason nodded slowly, a small bitter smile on his face. Good. He deserves it. Later that week, I heard through the grapevine that Brad's shop was temporarily shut down pending a full investigation. His customers were bailing, his employees were quitting, and his business partners were cutting ties. It was exactly what I wanted, not a single blow, but a series of calculated strikes that left him scrambling to pick up the pieces. And yet, I felt no joy in it. Satisfaction, maybe, but not happiness. The damage was done, and no amount of Brad's suffering would undo what he and Sarah had taken from me. That evening, I sat Jason down again. You know, I said, what Brad did doesn't define you. You're my son, no matter what anyone says. Jason gave me a long look, then nodded. No, Dad. And I'm glad you're my father, not him. Hearing those words, I realized something important. The real victory wasn't in Brad's downfall. It was in knowing that, despite everything, I still had Jason's love and trust. But Brad's reckoning wasn't over. There was one final move to make. The last phase of my plan was public. I organized a family meeting at my house, inviting everyone, cousins, aunts, uncles. It wasn't unusual for our family to gather, so no one suspected anything. When Brad walked in, his face was pale, his usual swagger replaced with a nervous energy. Sarah stood off to the side, looking like she wanted to disappear. I waited until everyone had settled before standing at the front of the room. There's something you all need to know, I said, my voice firm but calm. A truth that's been hidden for far too long. I told them everything. About the DNA test, about Brad and Sarah's affair, about Jason, and finally about the evidence against Brad's business. By the time I was done, the room was in chaos. Family members were shouting, some at Brad, others at Sarah. Brad tried to defend himself, but the evidence was overwhelming, and no one was buying his excuses. As I watched him squirm under the weight of his own lies, I felt a sense of closure. Not joy, not vindication. Just a quiet, resolute sense of justice. This wasn't about destroying him anymore. It was about making sure he could never hurt anyone else the way he'd hurt me and Jason. When the meeting ended, Brad left with his head down, his reputation in shambles. Sarah stayed behind, but we was nothing left to say. That night, as Jason and I sat on the porch, he turned to me and asked, "Do you feel better now?" I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I do, because in the end, it wasn't about Brad or Sarah. It was about protecting what mattered most, Jason. And that, I realized, was all the revenge I needed." The day after the family meeting, the dust began to settle. Brad's reputation was in ruins. The investigation into his business was picking up steam, and word of his affair with Sarah had spread through the family like wildfire. People who once admired him now wanted nothing to do with him. He was finished, both professionally and personally. Sarah moved out later that week. There was no dramatic goodbye, no begging for reconciliation. She packed her things quietly, leaving a note on the kitchen counter. It was short, an apology and a promise to do better for Jason's sake. I didn't feel relief or sadness when I read it. Just emptiness. For Jason, the weeks that followed were a mix of healing and growth. He threw himself into preparing for college, leaning on me for guidance and support. Our bond had only strengthened through all of this. One evening, as we sat in the garage fixing up his old bike, Jason looked up at me and said, "I still can't believe everything that happened. But I'm glad you were there for me. Dad, always." I replied, meaning every word. Despite Brad's downfall, I knew there was one final step I needed to take. Not for revenge, but for myself. The anger I'd carried for so long had served its purpose, but it was time to let it go. I drove to Brad's shop, now abandoned and shuttered, and waited for him to arrive. When he finally pulled up, he looked like a shadow of his former self. His clothes were wrinkled, his face lined with stress and sleepless nights. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice wary. "I want to make something clear," I said, stepping closer. "I didn't do this to destroy you, Brad. I did it to stop you from destroying anyone else." He looked away, his jaw tightening. Are you happy now?" I shook my head. This was never about happiness. It was about consequences. And now it's done. Brad didn't reply, but the weight of my words hung in the air. Finally, I turned to leave, but before I got in my car, I looked back at him one last time. "I don't forgive you," I said. "But I'm done with you. Don't come near me or my son again." He nodded, defeated, and I drove away without looking back. That night, as I sat on the porch with Jason, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. "Do you think things will ever go back to normal?" Jason asked. "No," I said honestly. "But that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes, we need to start over to find something better." He nodded thoughtfully, and for the first time I saw hope in his eyes. The lesson I learned through all of this was simple, but it resonated deeply. Life isn't about avoiding pain. It's about what you do after it finds you. Anger can drive you, but it can't heal you. Revenge can settle a score, but it can't bring back what you've lost. What truly matters is protecting what's left, building something stronger from the ashes of what's been broken. For me, that was Jason. For Jason, it was his future. And for Brad, well, Brad got exactly what he deserved. As I closed the chapter on this part of my life, I realized that real strength isn't in holding on to the past. It's in letting it go. And so I did.
She looked me dead in the eye over mashed potatoes and green beans and said, "You should be grateful she hasn't left you yet." My own mother. Voice calm, eyes dry, as if she were commenting on the weather. My fork stopped midair, and I realized my hand was trembling not from the illness, but from the clarity of that moment. 2 weeks earlier, I was diagnosed with something they called serious, but slow-moving. One of those long Latin-named syndromes that sounds like a Wi-Fi password and comes with a laundry list of symptoms and a timeline nobody wants to pin down. The doctor's words were clinical but hopeful. "You'll need to adjust," he said, "but this isn't the end." Far from it. I believed him until I got home. My wife, Lynn, barely looked up from her tablet when I told her. "So, what? You're not dying tomorrow?" she asked, almost annoyed. I remember laughing nervously. "No, it's manageable. We'll just need to." She cut in, setting down the tablet. "That's the thing. You say we like this changes my life." That was the first crack. And over the next few days, it spread like a hairline fracture down a windshield. Little things. The shift in her tone. The way she stopped saying good night. Her sudden habit of locking her phone, even during dinner. She'd disappear for hours with vague explanations. Yoga, book club, helping Angela with the baby. Angela doesn't have a baby. And then came the mistake of the group text. She thought she was sending it to someone else. I saw the notification flash across her screen while she showered. Just one line, but it was enough. He's still here. FFS. No name. No emoji. Just exhausted contempt. I didn't confront her. Not then. I just watched and waited. That brings us back to that Sunday dinner. I was sitting at the head of the table like some tragic king in a bad play, Mom to my left, Lynn to my right, and an air so thick with unspoken judgment I could barely swallow. We hadn't even cleared the plates when Mom leaned in, patted my hand like I was a feeble old man, and said it again clearer this time. Just accept it, sweetheart. You're sick. She's young. It's not like you'll be around forever. And Lynn? She clinked her glass to that. No denial. No shock. No shame. Just a tiny smirk at the corner of her mouth. Like they were in on a joke I wasn't smart enough to get. That's when I saw it all for what it was. Not just betrayal, but relief. They wanted to be gone. My diagnosis didn't scare them. It excited them. It was a clock, ticking down to their freedom. I excused myself to the bathroom, washed my hands, looked in the mirror, and smiled. Not because I was okay. I wasn't. Not because I had some master plan. I didn't. Not yet. But because in that exact moment, seeing my reflection, the faint tremor in my left arm, the weariness in my eyes, I realized something powerful. I wasn't the one dying. I was the one waking up. The garage camera lost signal at exactly 2:14 a.m. 6 hours of static. Not a glitch. Not a power outage. Just nothing. Later, Lynn would blame the internet, the router, the app. She'd call the camera company. They'd tell her everything was fine. And that would bother her more than anything else. Because she'd never find out how I did it. I stood in that garage for a few minutes before I left, just listening. The house was silent, except for the hum of the fridge in the kitchen and the occasional creak of the settling beams overhead. Lynn was asleep, or pretending to be. She hadn't asked about the doctor's follow-up. Didn't even look up from her wine when I came in earlier. She was already 3 glasses in, shoes off, watching some show about rich people screaming at each other. I walked past her once. Stopped. Looked at her. She didn't notice. Didn't want to notice. That helped. I went into the closet and reached for the old Navy duffel bag she once joked made me look like a gym teacher. I hadn't used it in years. Inside were 3 things. A waterproof folder with notarized copies of our house deed, my will, and a durable power of attorney she didn't know I'd revoked last month. A flash drive taped to the inside lining. Password protected. It held screenshots, video backups, and voice memos, including one of her saying, "If he croaks, at least the house is paid off." And $18,200 in small bills I'd been quietly pulling from our joint account since February. She thought I was buying supplements. No clothes. No toothbrush. Not even a phone charger. You don't need much when you're not running. You're executing. Before I left, I sat at the kitchen island and poured myself a small glass of water. Looked around. The smell of that vanilla-scented candle she liked still lingered. Fridge magnets with fake motivational quotes. Our wedding photo still hung beside the pantry, though crooked now, like even the wall had lost interest in keeping up appearances. I took the photo down, slid the picture out, flipped it over. There, on the back, in her handwriting from a lifetime ago. Together no matter what. I put it face down, walked out the door, didn't lock it. Outside, the air was cold, fresh, like the kind of cold that invites you to do something permanent. My car wasn't parked on our street. It hadn't been for weeks. I'd left it in a lot 2 blocks over. Paid cash. Cameras covered only the entrance, not the corner I parked in. As I walked there, I passed the bakery where we used to get coffee on Saturdays. They had a new display, gingerbread men shaped like skeletons. Cute. She'd like that. Shame she'll never taste them again. By the time the sun rose, I was already 143 miles away. No phone. No GPS. Just the printed map I'd traced with a pencil like it was 1996. No goodbye. No note. Just absence. Let them stew. Let them spin their story. Because by the time they realized I was gone, I'd already started becoming someone else. 3 days after I vanished, Lynn posted a photo of us on Facebook, one taken 10 years ago, on some forgettable anniversary dinner. I looked tan, half-drunk, and wildly in love. She looked effortlessly smug, like someone posing with a prize they'd already decided to return for store credit. Her caption? Please come home. He's sick. He's not thinking clearly. We're all so worried. Broken heart. 176 likes in 3 hours. 42 comments. Half from friends I hadn't heard from in years. Prayers up. Hope he's found safe. So sorry you're going through this, Lynn. The other half were more disturbing. Maybe it's the meds messing with his mind? Does he have a history of this kind of behavior? I remember he had a temper. Ah, yes, the temper. Otherwise known as, he once didn't like my cousin staying with us for a month rent-free. Lynn had always been subtle with her narratives until now. This wasn't subtle. This was curated collapse. It was reputation warfare dressed up in concern. She even added a black and white filter to the photo, because nothing screams manic episode like a grayscale memory. Meanwhile, my mother took a more old-school approach. Church ladies. Book club. Her bi-weekly lunch circle at the country club where they pretend the chicken salad is still homemade. He's not well, she told them. We've been trying everything. Therapy. Supplements. He just drifted. That was rich, coming from the woman who once said I was too emotional after my father died. She'd been waiting for this storyline. One where she was the long-suffering mother and I was the cracked porcelain teacup. She even called my cousin Mike, whom I hadn't spoken to since he stole my toolshed ladder in '09, and told him I'd gone missing after a particularly hard week. Mike texted me. Yo, you good? I didn't answer. I watched. From a motel room in Missouri, I sat cross-legged on the stiff, chemical-scented carpet, burner laptop open, using hotel Wi-Fi and a VPN routed through Canada. I had fake profiles on every platform, each one built months in advance, down to the birthday and fake high school. That's how I saw her DMs. Yes, Lynn was sloppy. She messaged a man named Greg Wineglass from her private account, the one she didn't use for family, the one with no last name. She told him I'd finally snapped, that she was doing everything she could to cover the bills, that I'd always been a little controlling. Greg's reply? If you need to come back here, you can. Back? Interesting. Now I had a name. And a location. Greg lived in Tulsa. The metadata in his old posts told me as much. A few more clicks and I had his real last name, a LinkedIn profile with a fake job title, and, most amusing, a wedding ring visible in his company's annual retreat photos. So, he was someone else's prize, too. By the end of that week, I had a folder labeled Gregory M_Tulsa sitting neatly on my desktop beside Lynn_assets and Mom_voicemails. I took a bite of the cold burger I'd left on the heater, looked at the screen, and smiled. They weren't just lying. They were investing in the lie, building it, believing it. And I was going to let them. Because the higher they stacked the narrative, the harder it would fall when the bottom was quietly cut out from under them. Collapse always looks more dramatic when you've just finished painting the ceiling. I didn't stumble onto the affair like some clueless husband tripping over lace underwear in the laundry basket. I cataloged it. With timestamps, GPS logs, reverse image searches. If I hadn't been so disgusted, I might have admired the sheer sloppiness of it all. Lynn wasn't clever, just shameless. It started with the receipts. One from a boutique hotel we'd never stayed at billed to our joint card, marked conference expense. I double-checked her calendar. No conference. I asked her casually, you went to Dallas last weekend, right? She blinked. No, babe. I told you, it was Waco. Angela's sister was in town. Angela again. That poor woman is going to end up as an alibi on a gravestone. So I looked deeper. The hotel emailed her a receipt for the spa package. I only knew that because she forgot to delete the auto-forward to our shared email folder. My account was still connected. Her mistake. Then came the wire transfers. Small at first. $50 here, $80 there. To a name I didn't recognize. R. Gentry. Tagged in her banking app as Dog Walker. We don't have a dog. So I dug. Found out R. Gentry lived 2 blocks from Greg's address in Tulsa. Cross-referenced him with social media. The same guy once tagged in an old dinner photo Lynn had uploaded 2 years ago, captioned, work trip, missing home. In the background of that photo, my mother, laughing, sitting across from Greg. That one nearly broke me, because it wasn't just her. My own mother knew, and she said nothing. Worse, she enabled it. Lent Lynn her car, gave her spa money, Told neighbors I was too tired to come out when I was sitting in the living room, fully dressed. She was laying bricks in a narrative I hadn't even realized they'd started building around me. So I stopped reacting and started recording. Voice memos from behind doors. One of Lynn on the phone saying he's not going to last long anyway. Another of my mother whispering, just be patient. It'll resolve itself. I made backups of everything, 3 copies, in 3 separate cloud vaults under different fake names. One under a vintage car club forum. Another in a dummy Dropbox folder labeled Tax Docs 2011. The third? Printed, sealed in envelopes, and mailed to myself under a private P.O. box. Some nights I'd sit on the edge of the bed while Lynn snored beside me, her back turned, and I'd scroll through her deleted photos, restored with simple recovery tools. She once took a mirror selfie in a hotel room, wrapped in a robe I didn't recognize, captioned Mine Tonight Kiss Mark, and forgot it synced to the cloud. Idiot. Each discovery chipped away at something I thought was unbreakable, and each one hardened something else. I started talking less, smiling more, playing the part of the dazed, sick husband. You look tired, Lynn would say, brushing past me. You should rest. Rest? No. I was documenting a crime scene with the patience of a surgeon and the eyes of a sniper. Because they thought this illness had made me soft, vulnerable, fading. But it hadn't weakened me. It had refined me. Every pill I took, every fake nap I pretended to fall into, every smile I gave when they slipped up was strategy. And when I disappeared, I didn't just walk away. I vanished with a war chest. She opened the door holding a mug, barefoot in flannel pajama pants, and froze when she saw me. 18 years. That's how long it had been since I'd last seen my daughter. And not by her choice or mine, really, but by the corrosive whispering of one woman, my mother, who had spent years quietly slicing away at our bond like a dull blade working through rope. She needs structure, she'd said when Abby started pushing boundaries as a teenager. She gets that from her mother's side, she said when Abby skipped school to visit her friend in the hospital. She's trying to manipulate you, she said when Abby asked me, tearfully, not to move across state lines after the divorce. And like the coward I was back then, I listened. I didn't fight hard enough. I didn't see what was happening until it was too late. Until I got a Christmas card with no return address and just her name, Abby, in lowercase. No love, dad, no photo, nothing. Just the barest nod of existence. And now here she stood, 29, older, sharper, tired, maybe, but in a self-protective kind of way. Her eyes still narrowed the same way when she was suspicious. She used to look at broccoli like that. She didn't speak, just stood there, mug in hand, steam rising between us like a veil neither of us wanted to pull down first. I don't expect anything, I said. Not even 5 minutes. But I have something you need to see. And if you let me, I'll sit outside and explain. Then I'll go. Still silence. Then, finally, you look thinner. I smiled a little. Yeah, illness does that. Betrayal helps too. Something in her face shifted. Not softened, but cracked. She stepped aside. The cabin was small, but warm. Mismatched furniture. A half-finished puzzle on the table. Paintings on the wall, not prints. Originals. Her style. Bold, tense colors. She was still painting. That nearly buckled me right there. She asked, not making eye contact. I nodded. Please. I sat at the edge of the couch, pulled the envelope from my bag. Thick. Heavy with paper and things that shouldn't have had to exist. I know I wasn't there, I said. And I'm not asking you to forgive me. But if you ever wondered why things went the way they did, why I stopped calling, why you thought I chose them over you. I slid the envelope toward her. It wasn't the truth. She didn't touch it at first, just stared at it like it might bite. Then finally, she pulled the tab and opened it. Photos, printouts, letters, voicemail transcripts. A copy of the old will my mother changed without my signature. A screenshot of the text my mother sent Lynn 6 months ago. If he makes it to Christmas, I'll be shocked. You've waited long enough. Take the house and move on. Abby's hand shook slightly as she read. She looked up at me once. I couldn't tell if her eyes were glassy or just catching the light. You lived with that? She asked, quietly. I documented it. Her laugh was dry. Of course you did. A beat passed. You know, she said, when Mom died. I thought about calling you, but I figured it was better to leave things dead. I know. She leaned back, took a sip of her tea. looked me over again. Then, after the longest pause, "You hungry?" I hadn't realized how tense I'd been until that moment. My shoulders dropped a half-inch. "I could eat," I said. She stood, opened a cupboard, and said, "Hope you still like tomato soup. I make it from scratch now." Something shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something far more important. Possibility. The first crack in their pretty little lie came not with a bang, but a transaction declined. Lynn stood in line at the grocery store, a bottle of overpriced red in one hand and her phone in the other, punching in her PIN code like the world owed her obedience. The machine blinked, then blinked again, then barked out a cold, final, declined. She laughed, loudly, because someone like her doesn't get declined. She told the cashier, "Try it again. It's our joint account. There must be a system error." It wasn't. She tried her banking app, error retrieving data. She tried calling the customer service line. After 15 minutes and 2 elevator music loops, the rep informed her, very politely, that she was not authorized on the account. She practically spit through the phone. "I'm his wife." "Yes, ma'am," the voice replied. "But your access was formally revoked on March 14th. That was 3 months ago." She dropped the wine and left it there. Walked out of the store in a haze of confusion, anger, and the growing, sick suspicion that something had slipped through her fingers while she was too busy sexting Greg behind my back. Next stop? The bank branch. She showed up with a fake smile and tight blouse, thinking charm might fix what treachery had broken. They printed out a copy of the deed transfer paperwork. She barely looked at it until she saw the date. 4 months ago. My signature, not hers. And one very specific clause, the house, our house, was now owned by a trust. A trust set up in the name of one Abigail Rhodes. Abby, my daughter. Lynn's eyes must have twitched. Or maybe it was her soul trying to exit her body through her cheekbone. "Can I speak to someone in legal?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "We've already spoken with them," the teller said. "Everything is in order." She stumbled out and called my mother. And that's when the second fracture hit. Because Mom, still wrapped in her delusion that she was the architect of my disappearance and not just a pitiful co-conspirator, answered on the second ring. "Sweetheart, don't worry," she said, her voice syrupy. "I'm sure he's just confused. You know how men are when they get sick. Paranoid. Detached. My Harold." She didn't get to finish, because a courier pulled into her driveway at that very moment, stepped out in khakis and a gray polo, and handed her a manila envelope with a signature-required sticker. Inside? A letter, a transcript, and a tiny USB drive. The transcript was every voicemail she left me last year, including the one where she said, "Let her have a little fun, darling. She's not cheating. She's just bored. You'll be gone soon anyway." And the USB? Audio clips, edited neatly, with dates and timestamps. Her whispering behind my back. Her dismissals. Her promises to Lynn. And that one fateful message to Greg, when she borrowed Lynn's phone by accident and called him instead of me. "We're close. Just a few more months and he'll be out of the picture. I'll make sure the estate transitions quietly. He trusts me." Trust. Such a beautiful, brutal word. By nightfall, Mom was leaving panicked voicemails on her attorney's line. And Lynn? She tried to call Greg. Straight to voicemail. She tried again. And again. Until the phone finally rang once and then disconnected. A sign of someone who blocked her mid-ring. That's when the panic truly set in. Not because she was losing the house. Not because her finances had turned to dust. But because for the first time, she realized she wasn't in control of the story anymore. The mask cracked. The fantasy collapsed. And all that was left was her reflection. And a story no one believed. The night Lynn lit the candles, she was wearing the black silk dress I bought her for our 10th anniversary. The irony would have been amusing if it wasn't so grotesque. She poured wine, Cabernet, always too dry for her taste, and set the table like a scene from a magazine. Folded napkins, steak plated with asparagus, dim lighting. Romance, repackaged. But not for me. Greg sat at the end of the table, still in his dress shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows like he wanted the world to see his forearms had done work today. She laughed a little too loudly at something he said, probably some story about his consulting firm, which I'd already verified was a glorified title for semi-legal freelance logistics. It didn't matter. She didn't love him. She loved the idea of being seen with someone who wasn't slowly dying. What she didn't know, I'd had the server booked a week in advance. Not a process server. No, I hired someone from a catering agency. Dressed in black slacks, white shirt, even a bow tie. Looked like part of the staff. Walked up to the front door like he was delivering late dessert. Lynn opened it, still holding her wine glass. "Oh, you're early. Wait, we didn't order." The man smiled. "Special delivery for Lynn Banning." He handed her a black folio and left before she even blinked. She looked down at it like it was a joke. A prank. Then she flipped it open and saw the top sheet. Petition for divorce. Underneath, restraining order application. Below that, asset seizure request. And finally, what made her drop her wine glass onto the rug? Flash drive. Evidence of marital misconduct. She stood frozen in the doorway, staring into the file like it might catch fire. Greg looked over from the table, fork midair. "What's going on?" Lynn tried to laugh, waved it off. It's just some legal mix-up. He's trying to." Greg stood, walked over, looked at the top sheet. "Read it." Then looked at her. "You told me he was in a facility." She blinked. "I what?" "You said he wasn't well. That he was under care. That he was sedated." "That's what my mom said. That's what we thought." "He was sick, Greg." He held up a hand, stepped back, looked at the flash drive, then at her, then at the door, and walked out. No shouting, no drama, just one word. "Damn." Lynn followed him to the porch in her bare feet, screaming his name, the silk clinging to her like a shrinking curtain on a collapsing stage. He didn't turn around. What she didn't know, what he didn't know yet, is that the HR department at Greg's company had received an anonymous package 3 days earlier. Inside, a short video, timestamped, showing him entering a hotel room midday during company hours. 2 voice messages forwarded directly to his manager's inbox. 1 printed receipt. It didn't take much. Conflict of interest was a phrase that HR loves. So is investigation. His phone would be ringing soon, but not with her number. Back inside, Lynn finally dropped to her knees, still holding the folder like it might disappear if she just crumpled it hard enough. The candles flickered. The steak grew cold. And the silence in that room? It was the first honest thing she'd heard in months. The fundraiser was held at the Astoria Pavilion, a restored Art Deco ballroom with enough polished marble and white linen to convince the suburban elite they were important for an evening. Lynn showed up solo, dressed to the teeth, diamonds dangling like bait, her makeup sculpted with surgical precision. This was supposed to be her re-entry, her bounce back. After weeks of silence, lawyers, and public questions, tonight was her chance to remind the social circle that she was still someone. Still beautiful. Still a presence. The whispers had already started as she walked in. "She looks thin. Didn't she used to come here with her husband? I heard he's, well." "No one knows." Vanished. She smiled through it. Let them talk. Let the silence work for her. She figured people would fill the void with their own pity. That always worked before. The evening rolled on as expected. Polite applause for sponsors, forced laughter, overpriced wine in recycled glasses. Lynn positioned herself near the event chairwoman, made sure to be photographed at least twice near the floral wall. If she kept the rhythm right, smile, nod, sit, smirk, maybe the world would believe she hadn't been hollowed out from the inside. Then came the tribute. The lights dimmed. A projector flickered to life. "Tonight, we also honor a donor whose generosity made the new outreach center possible." Lynn tilted her head. She hadn't heard of any new donors. The screen lit up with a familiar face. Her face. In a photo from 3 years ago, Lynn and I standing at a ribbon cutting for a literacy initiative. She froze. Murmurs buzzed. Then the photos changed. Me standing with kids at a workshop. Me smiling beside a restored cabin, flanked by 2 veterans. Me shaking hands with the mayor. Me beside Abby. That's when the room shifted. The crowd went quiet. The air tightened. Lynn's wine glass wobbled slightly in her hand. Abby was unmistakable. The same sharp cheekbones, the fire in her posture. She had my eyes and the same crooked grin I thought I'd lost when she was a teenager. And there I was, arm around her shoulder, both of us smiling like nothing had ever been broken. The video faded to black. Applause. Lynn stood completely still, mouth slightly open. Then she felt it, that unmistakable shift in atmosphere. People were looking at her now. Not with admiration. Not even curiosity. With knowing. And then, she saw me. Back of the ballroom. Not center stage. No spotlight. Just leaning against a column, hands in my pockets, dressed in the same dark suit I wore to her father's funeral. Alive. Calm. Not frail. Not sick. Not a ghost. I raised a glass. Gave her the smallest nod. No smile. No scowl. Just that little gesture that said, I see you now. The real you. She dropped her clutch. It hit the floor with a slap. No one bent to pick it up. She turned to the event chairwoman, mouth open, fingers trembling, but the woman had already turned away, moving towards someone else. Someone present. Because in that moment, Lynn realized what she was. The past tense. And the worst part? No one even clapped for her. The envelope arrived mid-morning, hand-delivered by a courier who barely made eye contact. Lynn was still in her robe, mascara smudged from the night before, her hair twisted up in that brittle, slept-on way that always made her look older. She opened the door with one hand and a hangover aspirin in the other. Mrs. Banning? She blinked. Yes. This is for you. Signature required. No folder this time. Just a stark white envelope, thick and cold to the touch. Legal weight. That kind of paper doesn't fold, it binds. She sat at the kitchen island, the same marble-top slab where she used to sip coffee and browse home renovation blogs while telling herself her husband was just too sensitive. She broke the seal. Inside was a letterhead she recognized. The law firm that once handled our estate planning. Below that, a statement of full beneficiary transfer. It took her a moment to parse the language. The document was surgical in tone, stripped of sentiment, dripping with finality. All my business shares gone. All pension and retirement assets transferred. All life insurance policies redirected. Medical permissions revoked and reassigned. Recipient, Abigail Rhodes. It wasn't just a gesture. It was total removal. A systemic deletion. She'd been wiped off the table like a spilled drink. Then she saw it, tucked inside a handwritten note. Not a card. Not a letter. Just one torn sheet of yellow legal paper. You two kept waiting for me to die. Turns out, I had to. Not physically. Just socially. I may have been sick. But you two were the real disease. Consider this chemo. She laughed. But it wasn't laughter. More like an exhale cut in half by disbelief. She stood, knocked over her chair, began pacing barefoot across the cold tile like she could outrun the meaning of the words. She called the firm. Got put on hold. When someone finally answered, they confirmed every line. The changes had been in motion for months. Signatures, witnesses, even psychiatric evaluations to ensure I was of sound mind. Is there anything I can do? She asked, voice tight, trembling. A pause. Then the answer she dreaded. No, ma'am. The assets are no longer yours to contest. Click. She threw the phone across the kitchen. It cracked against the fridge, slid under the counter like it was hiding from her. 10 minutes later, the second letter arrived. This one wasn't hers. It was for my mother. Delivered by certified mail to her retirement condo, where she'd been sulking for days, refusing visitors, holding on to whatever social capital she still believed she had. Inside that letter? Audio transcripts of her calls. Printouts of her emails. A medical directive she didn't know I had revoked 2 years ago. She was no longer my emergency contact. No longer able to make decisions. Not even authorized to collect ashes, should it ever come to that. She called Lynn in a fury. Lynn didn't answer. She was in the bathroom. On the floor. Staring at herself in the mirror and mouthing the word, how? How did she miss this? How did I beat her? Because she thought betrayal was control. That infidelity was leverage. That my illness meant she had time. But she didn't account for my clarity. That illness didn't make me weaker, it stripped the fog. I saw the world for what it was. For what they were. And I made my final decisions with that clarity. Without anger. Without revenge in the traditional sense. Just removal. Like poison from a bloodstream. The infection was gone. And the patient? Already healing. The sky was a burnt orange bruise bleeding into dusk when the phone vibrated again. It lay face down on the windowsill, next to a chipped mug and a half-finished crossword. The burner had only one app installed. No contacts, no history, just a quiet, pulsing notification center that refused to die. Every buzz came like an echo from a collapsing world he no longer lived in. He finally picked it up. Missed calls, 266. 83 from Lynn. 47 from his mother. The rest? Unknown numbers, blocked IDs, probably lawyers, maybe vultures. He scrolled through the names. Lynn's last message wasn't a call, it was a voicemail. He didn't press play. Instead, he opened the message tab. The most recent read. Please. I don't care about the money. Just talk to me. Please. Before that. She doesn't need it. She didn't even know you. I was your wife. And before that. They're freezing everything. Greg won't return my calls. You've destroyed my life. He hovered for a moment, not out of hesitation, out of habit. Years of reading her lies and trying to decode the space between her words like some desperate translator working on a dying dialect. Then he tapped Select All and pressed Delete. The screen went dark. Outside, the lake shimmered quietly, the trees casting long shadows like arms reaching for nothing. Smoke curled lazily from the grill. He'd overcooked the chicken, but it didn't matter. The smell reminded him of weekends from a different lifetime, back when normal meant dirty sneakers and bug bites, not silence and legal prep. The cabin creaked softly with movement. Behind him, the door cracked open. Abby's voice came through, warm and even. Dinner's ready. He didn't turn, just stood for a breath longer, watching the smoke drift upward like some ancient signal finally understood. Then he stepped inside. No phone in hand. No explanations offered. No apologies given. Inside, the table was set. Real plates. Real silverware. No screens, no distractions, just soup, bread, and the woman who once believed he had abandoned her, now pouring wine like it was never in doubt. As he sat, she asked, "You good?" He nodded. And across town, across cities, across all that rotten distance, two women stared at phones that would never ring again. Because it wasn't about time anymore. He wasn't running out of it. They were. The message came through at 3:12 p.m. Colin was in his home office, sunlight bouncing off the tidy desk, half-finished mug of black coffee beside his mousepad, folders labeled with tidy tabs, Q1 projections, Client A arbitration, pending approvals. His world was spreadsheets and logic. A world where things had their place. A world where messes got cleaned up, quietly, efficiently, and without leaving a stain. And then, a vibration. He glanced at his phone, expecting something about a delivery window or an invoice. Instead, it was Rachel. Not a message. An image. The preview showed just a blur of skin and sheets. For a moment, he thought it was a mistake. Some missent file. But then the photo began to load, line by line, like a slow guillotine cutting through certainty. Rachel, bare-shouldered, tousled hair, propped on one elbow, smirking. Next to her, half covered by the duvet, was a man. Tan, younger. Tattoo on his shoulder. Smiling too. They looked proud. Under the image, a single caption. "You can't stop me. I'm done hiding." Colin blinked once. No surge of rage. No scream. No theatrical smashing of mugs or overturning chairs. Just a moment of stillness. Measured breathing. His thumb hovered above the keyboard. He typed one word. Lawyer. And hit send. That was it. No threats. No pleas. No why or how could you or who is he. Just a word that landed like a trap snapping shut. Then he set the phone face down. Closed the file he'd been reviewing. Clicked the lid of the laptop until it made that soft, final click. And he exhaled. But here's what mattered, the part she never saw coming. Colin didn't exhale like a man who'd been broken. He exhaled like a man releasing a plan into motion. Outside, the wind stirred the maple leaves in the yard. He could hear the faint hum of a lawn mower down the street. Somewhere, a neighbor's wind chime sang out a discordant note. The world kept spinning. Inside, though, inside this calm, curated office, a war had just begun. But not a loud one. Not a messy one. No shouting. No open wounds. This war would be fought with paperwork. With timing. With documents Rachel never once bothered to read. With names she didn't recognize on deeds and contracts she never asked to sign. Because Rachel, in all her pride and clever cruelty, had never truly known the man she betrayed. She thought she'd lit a match. But she'd stepped into a room filled with gas. That smirk on her face? The one in the photo? It was already past tense. The phone buzzed again. He didn't check it. He knew what was coming. Panic wouldn't take long. But Colin was already elsewhere. Not in grief. not in rage. In motion. Rachel used to hum when she cooked. Nothing dramatic, just this low, almost subconscious melody, like her soul needed a background score while she stirred sauce or chopped vegetables. Sometimes it was old jazz. Sometimes show tunes. Once, Colin caught her humming Metallica and she laughed. Blame your playlist, nerd. That version of her, the one with the apron smeared with flour, a glass of red wine half-sipped, bare feet dancing across the tile, that Rachel had vanished so gradually it felt like a magic trick. A slow disappearance. No announcement. No puff of smoke. Just a series of silences. 2 years ago, maybe 3, the humming stopped. She became sharper. Not just in how she dressed, though that changed too. Bolder heels, tighter blouses, lips always blood red. But in tone, her sentences grew clipped. Her eyes carried a weight of expectation that turned dinner into interrogation. She'd wait until Colin's fork was halfway to his mouth to drop something like, "Don't you ever wonder if you've wasted your potential?" She called his routines robotic. Said he lived in spreadsheets and schedules like a monk in a digital monastery. When he responded with a dry smile and kept eating, she scoffed. He remembered one night in particular. They were brushing their teeth, standing side by side, looking into the mirror, a little toothpaste on her chin. She asked, "Do you think we're boring?" Colin said, "I think we're stable." She rinsed her mouth, spat, and muttered, "Stable is a death sentence." She stopped wearing her wedding ring a month later. No comment. Just gone one morning. Sitting on the vanity like an object misplaced. Colin saw it, noted it, said nothing. He wasn't blind, but he was patient. That's the part Rachel never understood. She thought his silence meant ignorance. That his even temper was passivity. That his loyalty was weakness. In reality, Colin had simply decided not to fight for someone who was already halfway out the door. Instead, he watched. She claimed late-night meetings, networking cocktails, weekend strategy retreats. She smelled different, new perfume, bolder. Her phone was always upside down. Notifications silenced. She was trying to provoke him. He knew it. The smirks when she walked in at midnight. The subtle digs when he said he'd made dinner. You didn't have to wait, you know. I wasn't even hungry. It was theater. And Colin played his role. But behind the scenes, he hired a private investigator. Not because he needed proof for himself. He already knew. But because when you build your life carefully, when every contract, every asset, every shared account is tied together like a circuit board, you don't react emotionally. You document. You prepare. He started checking the mileage on her car. Not obsessively, just every few weeks. Subtle things. A receipt from a spa she never mentioned. A new charger in her bag. That nervous glance she gave when he picked up her keys by mistake. The night she laughed at his career, mocked the company he built from nothing, called it cute that you still wear polos like some middle-aged intern. Colin didn't respond. But he watched her closely as she poured herself another glass of wine, oblivious. That was the night he moved certain files from his personal laptop to a secure cloud drive. That was the night he scheduled a quiet lunch with Mr. Banner, the family lawyer she thought was retired. That was the night he stopped waiting. Rachel had been drifting for years. Colin had just stopped pretending to throw her a rope. She used to call it her sanctuary. When friends came over, Rachel would sweep through the house like some HGTV duchess giving a tour. We went with Carrara marble for the island. Don't you love how it reflects the light? Or, this chandelier? Custom. I saw it in a magazine in Milan. The guests would nod, wide-eyed. And Rachel? She glowed, as if every backsplash and throw pillow confirmed some silent superiority. She had an origin story for everything. Claimed the open-concept kitchen was her vision. Said she negotiated the French doors herself. Insisted she fought the architect on the flow of the downstairs office, Colin's office, and won. Sometimes, she even told people she personally secured the financing. She handles the money in the marriage, one of her coworkers once joked to Colin at a fundraiser. Smart guy, letting the wife run the show. Colin smiled politely. Tapped his glass. Didn't correct him. Why would he? 5 years earlier, when Rachel was busy posting Instagram polls about which stone should we use for the foyer floor, Colin had quietly executed a move she never even thought to question. After a surprise acquisition deal had padded his account by an extra 7 figures, Colin bought the house outright, in the name of a holding company he owned privately, registered out of state. The paperwork was dense, the legal structure intentionally opaque. Rachel's name appeared nowhere. She'd signed documents at the closing, sure, but she never read them. Never asked why the lawyer handled everything, why her presence was barely required. She didn't care about the structure, she wanted the stage. And Colin gave it to her. For 5 years, she pranced around a house she thought she ruled. She picked curtains and threw wine nights and hosted charity brunches in her home. All while Colin watched. Let her believe. Let her build the illusion. Because illusions are fragile, and Colin didn't need to break hers. He just needed her to walk straight into the truth when it cracked on its own. The day after Rachel sent that photo, the day after her smug little rebellion with its smug little caption, Colin made one phone call. Activate the clause, he told Banner. By the following evening, a formal letter had been drafted. Certified. Sent. It outlined, in cool, measured language, that per the terms of the living agreement, an agreement Rachel signed without reading, she was not an owner, not a co-tenant, a guest, with 30 days' notice. And pending that, her access to shared financial accounts was frozen for audit. Colin walked through the house that night with a glass of scotch, barefoot on the floors Rachel swore she'd chosen because they were French, not those cheap engineered boards you liked. He smiled. Because for all her talk, for all her performative control, Rachel had built a throne on sand. And now the tide was coming in. The car was a red Jaguar F-Pace, leather seats like a cigar lounge, touchscreen so glossy you could check your lipstick in it, if you were the type who didn't mind leaving fingerprints. Rachel called it her baby, like it had come out of her womb. There were entire Instagram highlights dedicated to it. Morning grind with my girl, oncoming automobile sparkles, captioned over a shot of her manicured hand on the wheel. New wheels, who dis? Posted the day she got it, with 3 photos, one from the dealership lot, one with her pouting in the driver's seat, and one where she'd forced Colin to hold the keys like he was the trophy. She loved the reactions. Ugh, I need your life. Boss babe vibes. You deserve it all, Ratch. What none of them knew, what even Rachel didn't truly understand, was that Colin's name wasn't just on the lease. His company's name was. It was part of a broader tax strategy. Vehicles registered under the business, maintenance folded into write-offs, insurance negotiated as part of a fleet package. Efficient, elegant, quiet. Rachel had been an authorized driver, a name on a page, like a teenage niece borrowing a car over the summer. Not an owner, never an owner. Colin had reminded her once, casually back when things were still civil. She'd called to ask if she could get custom plates. He told her no. Explained the lease. Explained the corporate terms. She brushed him off with a laugh. Oh, Colin. You and your little control freak fine print. Control freak. She used that phrase a lot. Whenever she hit a boundary she didn't like. Whenever reality pushed back on her fantasy. So the morning after the photo, after she sent that smug, sunlit middle finger wrapped in cotton hotel sheets, Colin logged into the fleet management portal from his laptop. He clicked one button. Terminate lease. Immediate. The system prompted a confirmation. Colin didn't hesitate. The Jaguar? It would be gone by week's end. Repossessed. The repo team didn't knock. They scanned, locked, and hauled. Like ghosts. No drama. No conversation. Just sudden, brutal absence. He imagined the moment. Rachel walking out of some boutique, hands full of shopping bags, trying to remember where she parked. Pressing the fob. Hearing nothing. Furrowing her brow. Pressing again. Then realizing. Then calling the dealership in a panic. Then hearing the words no influencer ever wants to hear. Ma'am, the lease was terminated. You were a secondary driver. If you'd like to purchase the vehicle, we can refer you to sales. Colin didn't need to witness it. He felt it. And that was enough. He sipped his coffee, black, no sugar, and glanced at the framed photo on the shelf. A trip to Seattle. For years ago. Rachel had insisted on that stupid duckface pose. He kept it up, not out of sentiment, but precision. A cataloged artifact. Proof of a version of her that once pretended to be a partner. Now she learned that the lifestyle she flaunted had always been borrowed. And he was done lending. Mr. Banner arrived at 6:40 p.m. No fanfare. No expensive car. Just a battered leather briefcase, weathered trench coat, and a gaze that looked like it hadn't flinched since Nixon resigned. He parked down the street, as instructed, and let himself in through the side gate. Colin appreciated people who understood discretion without needing it explained. They didn't speak at first, just the sound of shoes on hardwood and the distant hum of the dishwasher. Banner walked into the office like he'd done it 100 times, because he had. Not recently, but often enough in the past to know where the liquor was kept and which chair didn't creak. Colin poured 2 fingers of Glendronach, handed Banner a glass, and sat down. "So," Banner said, swirling the amber. "She finally stepped in it." Colin didn't smile, just nodded once. Photo came through this afternoon. Hotel bed. Caption, "You can't stop me." Banner let out a short exhale that sounded dangerously close to a laugh. Classy. Colin opened his drawer and pulled out a black notebook, spiral-bound, no labels. He slid it across the table. Inside were timestamps, license plate photos, dinner receipts from places Colin never liked, gym check-ins that didn't match her alibi, and a napkin from a steakhouse scribbled with "can't wait for next time" winking face. Banner flipped through it with practiced disinterest. "Private investigator do the lifting?" "Mostly," Colin said. "I handled the early surveillance myself. Didn't want to tip her off too soon." Banner's respect didn't show on his face, but it was there, in the speed with which he closed the book, reached into his briefcase, and pulled out a folder already labeled with Rachel's full name. No maiden name, no hyphen, just the name she wore like a designer badge, right until it stopped serving her. The folder was thick. Banner placed it on the desk like a final move in a slow, inevitable game. "You ready?" he asked. Colin looked at the folder, tapped it once with his index finger. "Time to initiate the protocol." Banner opened it. The first document was a formal petition for legal separation, pre-drafted months ago, with every clause already signed off internally. No community property claims. No spousal support requests. Just clean severance, made possible by premarital asset shielding and a few very strategic trust structures. Second, a financial breakdown. Every account, every dollar moved quietly over the past 18 months into compartments Rachel couldn't see, touch, or spell. Third, an asset trace. Rachel's fingerprints were on none of it. Her spending had been ornamental and funded entirely by accounts Colin could shut off like a faucet. Fourth, and Banner paused before sliding this one forward, a compiled dossier of her affairs. Plural. Not just Blake, the smug-tanned idiot in the hotel room. There were 2 others, a real estate broker and a personal trainer. One affair ended before the other began. Colin didn't flinch. He already knew. He wasn't chasing justice. He was ensuring it landed quietly. Banner looked up. "I assume we're sending the email tonight." Colin nodded. "She'll get it before bedtime. Let her enjoy one last evening of borrowed comfort." Banner tapped the folder. "Everything's in motion. Once she opens this, she'll realize the floor she's been walking on wasn't concrete. It was glass." Colin leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers. "Good," he said. "Let it crack." Banner stood. "She played poker, Colin. But you were playing chess. And she never saw the board." Colin looked at the untouched glass of scotch in front of him. Then, with perfect calm, he pushed it aside and reached for his laptop. It came exactly 62 minutes after he sent the text. Colin was sitting on the patio by then, a throw blanket over his lap, laptop glowing with spreadsheets and quarterly targets. From the outside, he looked like any man finishing a long day of work. One glass of wine, one glowing screen, one calm evening breeze stirring the ivy. And then the phone rang. Rachel. He let it buzz twice. 3 times. Then he answered. "What did you mean, a lawyer?" she snapped. Her voice wasn't playful. No flirt, no smirk. Just that shrill tension people get when they realize a joke landed too hard on the wrong person. Colin didn't shift. Didn't even blink. "You'll find out soon enough," he said. "Check your email." "What email?" "Colin, what the hell is going on?" He didn't indulge her with theatrics. Just a low, unhurried. "Start with the one from Banner and low. Subject line says notification of separation protocol." Then he hung up and waited. The next few minutes passed with clinical silence. Then his voicemail lit up, and the screams began. First message, frantic. "You're doing this just because I sent one picture? That's emotional abuse, Colin. You're being ridiculous." Second, Angry. You're freezing the accounts? Are you out of your mind? That's our money. What kind of psycho punishes their wife like this? Third. Panicked. The lease is canceled? They're towing the Jag tomorrow? I have meetings. How am I supposed to work? Fourth. Pleading. Please call me back. Please. I didn't know. Okay. I didn't know about the house. I didn't read the deed. I just signed what the lawyer gave me. We can talk about this. Colin, please. He listened to none of them. Just sat there, watching the sun dip behind the neighbor's roofline. Each voicemail another mile, she drove deeper into the canyon she'd carved all by herself. The fifth message was just static, then heavy breathing, then a whisper. I can't believe this is happening. That one he saved. He didn't smile, didn't gloat, but he did open the secure server and check the document read receipts. Banner's email had been opened. Every attachment reviewed. The timeline, the property titles, the corporate ownerships. The prenup she forgot existed, now reactivated under Clause 8b. Rachel wasn't just reading legalese. She was reading the obituary of her entitlement. And Colin? He just sipped his wine. Quiet. Intentional. Because when a house of cards falls, you don't need to shout. You just need to make sure you were never under it. Rachel showed up at Blake's condo with 2 designer suitcases, a garment bag full of dresses she'd never worn around Colin, and a false confidence so thick you could smell it under the overpriced perfume. Blake lived in a downtown high-rise, sleek, loud, all sharp angles and rooftop cocktail hours. The kind of place built to impress people who care more about how their life looks than how it actually feels. Rachel fit right in. At least, she thought she did. She texted him in all caps. I need to stay with you for a while. Long story. Let's talk. He didn't respond immediately, but she took that as a soft yes. He'd always been casual about replies. Investor life, babe, he used to joke. I juggle 9 deals before breakfast. So she showed up. Lipstick perfect. Glassy-eyed but defiant. Told the doorman she was Blake's guest, like she'd been there 100 times. And to her surprise, the guy buzzed her through. No questions. Blake opened the door in a hoodie and joggers. Hair tousled. No smile. She smiled enough for both of them. Hey, she said, brushing past him like it was their anniversary. Crazy day. Listen, I just need a few nights to figure stuff out. My husband's lost it. He's trying to cut me off and, he held up a hand. Flat. Like a traffic cop. Wait. What? She blinked. I just said. Colin's losing his mind. He's freezing accounts and making threats. No, Blake said, stepping back. You said you had money. Like, assets. Your own stuff. She paused. What? I mean, we had money. Colin and I. But that's all frozen right now, just temporarily. It's a glitch, really. I'll bounce back. Blake didn't move. You told me you were half owner on that house. Rachel's face twitched. Yeah, well, so what if it's technically under his company? That doesn't change anything. I live there. I made that place. It's mine. He raised an eyebrow. Lived there. Not owned it. Blake, what are you even saying? He looked over her shoulder at the bag sitting just inside the door. I'm saying I've got enough chaos in my life. I don't need someone else's fallout. Her voice dropped, cold and small. You're seriously kicking me out right now? I'm seriously not getting sued because some guy finds out his cheating wife moved into my place a week after emailing him a legal grenade. That's not investor risk. It's lunacy. She stared at him, mouth open, heartbeat in her ears. You're unbelievable, she said. He shrugged. You sold me a lie. Fancy dinners. Pretty clothes. That little speech about leaving a loveless marriage for something real. I didn't know I was signing up for a soap opera. She didn't remember grabbing her bags. She didn't remember how she got back down the elevator. But she remembered the parking lot. The echo. The feeling of her heels clicking on concrete while everyone stared and no one helped. She stood beside a trash can under a flickering streetlight. The silence pressed in. She tried to call Colin again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. This time she didn't scream. She just stared at the screen as if maybe, if she held her breath, he'd pick up. He didn't. He wasn't watching her anymore. And Blake? He was probably pouring himself a drink, opening his laptop, and pretending she never happened. Her entire future had been a gamble. And she'd bet it all on a man who'd been playing pretend. The car she came in? Already flagged for repossession. The condo she left behind? Locks changed. The lover she thought would rescue her? He'd been waiting for a queen. And she showed up with empty bags and a story no one wanted to hear. The call came from a number Colin hadn't seen in over a year, Rachel's sister, Dana. He stared at it for a moment, considered ignoring it. But then again, there was something poetic about hearing the crumbling walls from the inside. He answered on the third ring. Colin. Dana's voice was tight, already bracing for impact. It's Dana. Rachel's. She's not doing well. Colin said nothing. Let the silence stretch just long enough to force her to fill it. She said you're cutting her off completely. The house, the cards, the car, everything. She says you're trying to erase her. Is that true? He didn't raise his voice. Didn't lean forward, just sat back, looked out the window at the bay, and said with surgical precision, I'm not cutting her off. I'm reclaiming what was mine. Dana's breath caught. Colin, I get that you're hurt. I do. But don't you think this is a little extreme? I mean, she's living out of a motel right now. Colin let out a dry breath, half exhale, half laugh. She sent me a photo of herself in bed with another man, Dana. Captioned it, You can't stop me. I replied with one word, lawyer. And that's all I've said to her since. Dana went quiet. He could practically hear the gears turning. She told us, it wasn't like that, Dana finally muttered. She said you were cold, controlling, that she didn't feel seen. Colin swiveled slowly in his chair, looking at the framed copy of their marriage license on the shelf. He hadn't taken it down yet, mostly because he wanted it to be there when he didn't feel anything at all anymore. She stopped being seen the moment she became someone else, he said. I gave her everything she asked for, and when she realized that still didn't make her happy, she lit a match and blamed the floor. Dana didn't respond. Instead, she whispered, I'll talk to Mom. And just like that, the phone clicked off. But the whispers had started. Within days, Colin noticed the shift. Mutual friends stopped liking Rachel's posts. Family group chats went quiet. One of her cousins, a quiet but observant man named Leo, sent Colin a short message. Didn't know the full story. You deserved better. Just saying. Rachel's own brother removed her from the shared Netflix account. Small things, but damning. Her once loyal circle started shrinking fast. Because people could accept a lot from a person, arrogance, pride, even dishonesty, but entitlement wrapped in victimhood, that had a shelf life. Especially when receipts started surfacing. Rachel had always been loose with her secrets. She sent that photo like a weapon, not realizing it was ammunition against herself. Screenshots spread. Mutuals gossiped. Whispers became narratives. And the narrative became a verdict. She was the one who cheated. She was the one who lost everything. And now she wanted pity? No one was buying. Not after they learned that her dream car was leased under someone else's name. That her beloved home never belonged to her. That she strutted out of a stable marriage with a smirk, only to land in a motel with broken nails and no safety net. Rachel had played the part of the wronged woman for years. But now the curtain was pulled back, and everyone could see who she really was. Not a phoenix rising from the ashes. Just a woman who lit the fire, then cried when it burned her too. Rachel pulled into the driveway in a rental sedan, the kind with plastic interiors and a faint smell of sour coffee, still expecting the gate to recognize her key fob. It didn't. The gate blinked red. Wouldn't budge. She slammed her palm on the steering wheel, punched in the manual override code she barely remembered, and when that failed, she tailgated the delivery van through before it could close. The driver gave her a look. She didn't care. Not today. She was sweaty, frantic, furious, and for the first time in her life, uninvited in a place she once ruled. When she reached the front door, the anger gave way to something colder. The locks were changed, and taped to the glass in a crisp legal sleeve, perfectly centered, was a formal notice. Notice of access termination and scheduled property collection. This property is owned by Alder Peak Holdings, LLC. As per legal agreement and executed separation protocols, the undersigned, Rachel D. Mercer, is no longer an authorized occupant. Access to personal belongings will be granted during a 48-hour supervised window, coordinated via legal counsel. Attempts to bypass this order will be treated as trespassing. There was a signature at the bottom. D. Banner, ESQ. Rachel ripped the paper off the door so hard she nearly tore it. Her hands shook. She fumbled for her phone, tried calling again. Straight to voicemail. Then Banner's office. The receptionist answered with a tone Rachel immediately hated. Good afternoon, Banner and Lowe. This is Rachel Mercer. I'm coming in. Tell him to be ready. She didn't wait for a response. It took her 17 minutes to reach the firm's Midtown office. She barely remembered the drive. Only the image of that notice burned into her vision like an afterimage from staring at the sun. When she burst through the frosted glass doors, she didn't wait to be announced. Banner's assistant opened her mouth to intervene, but Rachel had already stormed down the hall. David Banner was seated behind his desk, as calm and untouched as ever, reading something off a yellow legal pad. He didn't look surprised to see her. He didn't even look up immediately. She slammed the notice down in front of him. He can't do this. Banner finally looked up. No smile. No reaction. Just the slight tilt of a man who'd seen too many people mistake rage for leverage. He already did, he said, sliding a document across the desk with 2 fingers. Rachel didn't sit. Just leaned over and scanned it. A timeline. The date the holding company acquired the house. The clause in her prenup voiding cohabitation claims in absence of joint title. The addendum she signed 4 years ago during a refinancing, one she didn't read, just nodded through while asking the escrow agent if her new backsplash tile samples had arrived. And now? Now it was her eviction notice. Framed in gold trim. She swallowed. I'm still legally his wife. Banner nodded. And soon you'll be legally his ex-wife. You waived spousal property claims in 2016 when you filed your separate business license under your maiden name. Our firm handled it. I was there. That was for tax purposes. It was for your benefit at the time. Now it's for his. She blinked fast. Too fast. I live there. That house is mine. No, Banner said quietly. That house was yours to enjoy. And now it's yours to leave. She sank into the chair, stunned, as if her knees gave out mid-sentence. Banner tapped the edge of the file once more. I can arrange for a moving company. Supervised, of course. Or you can pick up your belongings yourself during the scheduled window. You have until Thursday. She didn't respond. Just stared at the paper, trying to find a flaw. A crack. Something. But it was airtight. Colin's signature was already there. Banner's seal embossed in the corner like a final, mocking bow. Rachel's voice dropped, barely audible. Is he really going to erase me like this? Banner folded his hands. He's not erasing you, Ms. Mercer. He's just removing you from things you never truly owned. She sat in silence, lips trembling not from sadness, but disbelief. The kind of disbelief that comes when you realize the stage was never yours and the audience is already gone. Outside, the wind had picked up, and inside that cold office, Rachel Mercer finally understood what it meant to have nothing to return to. The view was obscene. That's the word Colin kept thinking every time he looked out the window of the new condo. Obscene in the way wealth can be when it's quiet. Not flashy, not gaudy, just complete. A 33rd floor unit with full glass walls, a wraparound balcony, and the kind of sunset people pretended to enjoy on hotel postcards but never actually got to live inside. Everything about the place was intentional. Clean lines. No clutter. No sentimental junk. No coasters shaped like wine corks. No framed, fake inspirational quotes about love or laughter being the best spice. Just space, light, and a silence that didn't accuse him of being predictable. The first morning there, Colin made coffee barefoot and didn't have to step over a pair of forgotten stilettos or a coat dropped in a hurry. He opened the fridge and nothing smelled like someone else's skincare smoothies. He watched the espresso drip into his cup like a metronome and let himself think, just for a second. This is mine. All of it. Without apology. His phone buzzed with an email from Carter and Delaney. The contract had been signed, finally. The months-long negotiation that Rachel once rolled her eyes over. They're never going to go for your terms, Colin. They're sharks. Had concluded with everything he'd asked for. 7 figures, full IP retention, and a 3-year retainer clause that made his competitors foam. He didn't celebrate. Not immediately. He just forwarded the confirmation to Banner, subject line, execution complete, and then poured himself a second cup of coffee. Same mug, Same pace. But this time, he sipped like a man who'd just removed a tumor. The gathering happened that weekend. A handful of friends, some from the firm, a couple of old college roommates, even the project manager from his latest build, who'd once confessed he stayed late just to avoid his own wife screeching. No one Rachel liked. In fact, several were people she'd subtly banned from dinner parties with phrases like, "They just don't get us," or "He always looks at me weird." The new place hummed with quiet music, low conversation, good scotch. No heels clicking with forced laughter. No double cheek air kisses. Just real people who didn't care what anyone drove or wore. One guy brought chili in a Dutch oven. Colin served it in actual bowls, not vintage hand-thrown pottery that had to be angled right for Instagram. At one point, someone leaned over and asked him, half smiling, half serious, "You good?" Colin didn't answer right away. He looked around the room. At the furniture he chose, the friends who showed up, the skyline slicing through the dusk like a quiet declaration of freedom. Then he smiled. "For the first time in a long time," he said, and meant it. There were still emails from Rachel. One came that morning, subject line, "We need to talk." He hadn't opened it. Didn't need to. Because while she sat in some rented space, surrounded by clothes she could no longer afford and people who no longer returned her calls, Colin had stepped into a life that wasn't about erasing the past. It was about replacing it. And while the final blow was still waiting in the wings, paper-clipped, notarized, and sealed, he'd already written the ending in stone. The silence she left behind, he turned it into peace. She slipped past the front desk. Security recognized her face, hesitated for half a second, but she moved with enough desperation and just enough familiarity that no one stopped her. By the time she reached the elevator, her reflection in the chrome doors nearly made her flinch. Rachel Mercer, once the queen of curated style, always composed, always camera-ready, now looked like a faded copy of herself. Hair pulled back, not styled. Makeup smudged from something that had dried hours ago. Clothes wrinkled, expensive but tired, like she'd pulled them from the bottom of a suitcase. She pressed the button for the 33rd floor and watched the numbers blink upward, chest rising and falling in sharp, anxious waves. Her heels wobbled slightly. She hadn't worn this pair in months, they pinched now. When the doors opened, she stepped into a different world. Colin's world. The air was cooler here, stiller. The walls clean and unburdened. The floors didn't creak, and the view from the massive windows wasn't just impressive, it was indifferent. Like the bay itself had no interest in drama. She found him standing on the balcony, a whiskey in hand, shirt sleeves rolled up, calm as the tide. The wind tugged gently at his collar. He didn't flinch when the door opened. Didn't even turn. Rachel stepped closer, faltered, then finally spoke. "Please, Colin." He blinked, slow, still facing the view. "You're not this cold," she continued. "You're not. You loved me. For years. I know you did." Colin turned, finally, met her eyes. And for a second, just a breath, it looked like he might say something soft. Something forgivable. Instead, he stepped back into the condo and placed his glass on the table with the kind of care that comes from being done with things. For good. Rachel followed him in, voice trembling. "I gave you everything, Colin. My best years. My loyalty. You can't just erase me like this." He studied her. Not with anger. Not even pity. Just finality. "I didn't erase you," he said. His voice was calm. Firm. "You did that all by yourself." Silence bloomed between them. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Because somewhere deep in that disheveled heart, Rachel knew. This wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. This was closure. The kind that couldn't be negotiated. Couldn't be charmed. Couldn't be undone with tears, or memories, or cheap apologies whispered under city lights. She took a step forward. "Colin, just give me something. Anything. A chance to fix." "No," he said. Simply. Then gestured toward the hallway. "There's nothing left for you here. And we both know it." Rachel stood there, blinking, chest rising in jagged swells, hands trembling by her sides. She looked around the space, clean, modern, untouched by her influence. Not a single photo. Not a single trace of her. And that's when it hit her. She was already gone. Long before she ever stepped into that elevator. He turned away, picked up his glass, and walked to the window again, Back to the view, back to the quiet. Rachel stood for a moment longer, then walked out. No screams. No one chasing after her. Just the sound of the door closing behind her, a final echo in a place where her name no longer carried weight. She waited near the parking garage, alone, hiding behind a support beam like a trespasser in a building she once would have walked through like she owned the marble. She texted, called, even emailed again. Nothing. So when she saw him step out of the elevator in a black wool coat, leather gloves, and that same impossible calm, she didn't think. She moved. Colin. He paused mid-stride. Turned. She hadn't seen him up close since that night on the balcony. And something about the way he looked at her now, like a man glancing at a forgotten jacket in the back of his closet, made her knees nearly give. Rachel stood there in silence for a second too long. Then tried again. I just want to understand. After everything we were, after everything I gave, how are you this? Finished. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a white envelope. Clean. Sealed. He didn't toss it. Didn't wave it like some theatrical final blow. He just extended it toward her like a business card. This, he said, voice low, is your official release package. Signed and notarized. Inside is a detailed breakdown of what you're left with. No need to call. It's all itemized. She didn't take it at first, so he gently placed it in her hand. She stared at it like it might burn through her skin. What do you mean, release? Colin didn't answer, just gave a slow nod. One final nod. Then he turned and walked. No dramatic strut, no cruel last line, just the soft sound of his steps fading toward the exit, toward a life that no longer needed to include her, not even as a shadow. Rachel stood frozen, chest rising and falling like a drowning woman treading air. Finally, her shaking fingers slid under the flap of the envelope. Her breath hitched at the first document, a single-page summary, each line sharper than the one before. House, full ownership retained by holding company. Vehicle, lease terminated, returned to lessor. Bank accounts, joint accounts closed, personal account reconciled. Business equity, no shares ever granted. Marital assets, protected under prenup clause 4C. Final disbursement, one-time transfer of $12,000 for relocation and personal effects. NDA included. Her eyes scanned faster and faster until they began to blur. At the bottom, total value awarded to client, 100%. Total value awarded to Rachel Mercer, $0, excluding one-time disbursement. The envelope slipped from her hand. She dropped to her knees right there on the cold concrete floor, hands to her mouth, eyes wide, and then a whisper, barely audible. He owns everything. No one saw her collapse. No one came running. Colin didn't turn around, and the city didn't stop moving. But for Rachel, that was the moment the noise inside her finally stopped. Not because she found peace, but because there was nothing left to echo.